I'm Joey, and I'm a pup, and I love horror movies.
I'm Lauren. I'm also a pup, and I'm a huge baby when it comes to anything scary. Whenever I'm about to watch a scary movie, I have to look up all the spoilers so that I know what I'm getting into, but sometimes even that doesn't tell the whole story.
Luckily, I'm an expert, and I'm going to convince you better than the internet ever could. We'll examine the plot, go behind the scenes, and dissect everything that makes it scary.
And cool.
You're listening to Pupcorn in a Movie, Episode 6. Why are we doing this again?
Because I ain't afraid of no ghosts. Actually, I'm a little afraid.
Last week...
Yeah?
Yeah. I convinced you pretty easily, I think.
I'm a pushover when it comes down to it. I mean, I'm here. I'm doing this podcast with you. I pretty much know what's coming.
You might as well watch it, because then we don't really have a podcast.
Yeah.
You're kind of the bread and butter of this podcast.
I never thought about it that way.
Without you, it's just
bread.
It's just movie synopsis. It's just stale popcorn on a sticky floor. So with that being said,
we're glad to help you out.
We did watch the movie, and like always, we recorded our reaction. And I think this one happened to be very, very silly, just based on James Brolin's hair. But there are a lot of elements that I pulled that I think you're going to find very funny.
Good. I can't wait to hear it. It looks kind of like ice, but it also kind of looks like a man looming over something. I don't like this music. It's kind of dumb.
Oh, I thought you meant you don't like it and that it's scary.
No, I'm not scared at all.
Okay.
I think it's very heavy-handed and dumb.
Yeah, careful with that dead body there. All right, just leave it. Just leave it.
Brolin, looking good.
Right? Look at that beard.
Look at those eyebrows.
Mm-hmm.
So virile. Oh my gosh.
He's like, I'm going to make love to everything in this room.
Yeah. Did you know that Mrs. Doubtfire is in this movie as well?
I was going to say Anna Gasteyer.
Yeah.
Bye. And then there's Maud.
I know I'm 37, but I do like to wear my hair in pigtails every once in a while. So 70s, like on moving day to wear heels.
I left your front door open. Hello?
George?
Jane, his wife? Priests really just walk into anybody's house and just take what they want. One big, happy, blasphemous family. Well, that's odd. The doors usually don't close on their own in my own home.
I love the way this thing tastes.
Crucifix.
Ugh. Ugh. Awful. Fucking gross. No, I hate charbroiled hot dogs. I've told you this. I don't know why you keep making them. I specifically said I am allergic to charbroiled hot dogs.
Stepdad?
New dad? That's what I was thinking.
Oh, shit! Fuck! Clumsy asshole.
Just like on my wedding night.
This is the worst mirror that has ever existed.
Yeah, it is.
I'm gonna say...
Kethy?
It's almost right.
Is it Kethy?
Kethy, right? Kethy Litz.
That doll is grody.
Like the dog was taking it into the water before.
Nice butt, though. Wow.
Classic 70s butt.
Ay caramba.
Good evening.
Why didn't he yell or anything? I would have screamed.
I would have shoved my foot through the window. I know he left, but he must have gone to the strip club as he often does. Ugh, clean water. It's supposed to be black. Kathy, it happened again. Both my parents have the shits. Oh god, I gotta use the toilet.
You know when you do a little painting and you just want to put a little low-key Renaissance harpsichord on?
I just have the farts. Oh, sorry.
Babe, this movie is not scary. Capital N-O-T, not scary. The babysitter's gonna need therapy for the rest of her life now.
Right? It was the devil's plan all along to bilk him of $1,500 of his own money.
Yeah, it's very weird the way they did that. I can't believe people saw this in a theater and they were scared.
I don't think he even showed them any identification. It could have just been anybody. Hi, I'm man. Tell me what happened here. This guy's phone bill must be enormous.
I don't know.
He's like, the devil made me hit her. And made me get those prostitutes too.
Am I gonna explain this to Keffy?
Do you think they moved to New Jersey?
Yeah.
They live in another state. New Jersey.
Jack Krupnik.
He was
At your service.
He was the dead father.
Yeah, he was.
He had no lines, and you saw only his receding hairline.
I mean, honestly, they could have done without an actor. For that
Just a
one, they could
dummy.
have just, like, put a pumpkin in a bed.
Right. His head exploded like a pumpkin. Well, it was a pumpkin.
Oh, it was a pumpkin.
Yeah,
Wow, we had a lot to say about that one.
yeah, we did. It was a good heckling movie.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the Amityville Horror?
Well, I do want to just note for the record that I am now aware that one of the first things that I notice when I'm watching a movie is people's eyebrows.
Mm.
I tend to make note of it. So,
Oh, because somebody had straight eyebrows.
yeah, it was Susie Banyan.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, clearly we enjoyed watching it. It was fun. It was not scary at all. And the parts that were trying to be scary were just falling 500 yards short of that line.
Oh, wow.
It was not scary.
What about the movie coming out in 1979, like 1979 audiences? What do you think that they were scared of that made this the highest grossing independent movie of all time at that time?
Well, you know, I actually talked to my mom about this because I was wondering really what it was like. And she said, you know, they just hyped it up so much. When it was in theaters, people were just like already primed to be scared. I don't know.
So do you think that then they sold a lot of tickets just simply because word of mouth doesn't, run as fast, almost 40 years ago, and that people were sort of tricked in a way to see it, that like its popularity is not because it was a good movie, but enough people saw it all at once that it made all this money. And
definitely. And the energy of being in the theater and like being scared with other people. I would be curious really to interview some people that saw it in the theater in the 70s and like really ask if they were scared or if they were just hyped up.
Right. Because when I watch it, I think, what would I be thinking if I'm still under the influence that this is a true story?
Right.
And I'm watching this going like, I would never even survived one night.
The way that the house haunts them is so silly to me.
Right.
If it was truly a scary haunted house, it would be like playing with your mind or like whatever, not, shutting shutters or like shutting the door. But it's so goofy.
Right. Like, what is the point of scaring the people unless the spirit is somehow like this jester of a spirit?
Right.
Like there's no, like if you're a ghost and you want to get somebody out of the house and you can do it any way that you want, why wouldn't you go to the scariest thing first and just get them out?
Totally. Why wouldn't you make them like look in a mirror and watch their faces melt off or like something crazy?
Or just appear to them as this horrible demonic figure over their bed and just scream at them until they get out.
It's like toying with them needlessly. Like, did I shut that door? I thought I shut it. Oh, I guess I didn't shut it. Like,
don't slam the fucking door.
I'll move the chair over here.
There's
now.
too much plausible deniability in this haunting, and it makes no sense. If you want to haunt someone, you better haunt them, okay? That's what I'm saying. You better come correct if you're going to haunt me out of my house.
The Amityville Horror is like the equivalent of like throwing a sheet over your head and cutting two eye holes and going boo.
Yeah.
And then just leaving.
Absolutely. So a bit lame in that respect.
We talked a lot before about sort of the iconography, the Catholic religious iconography, and how sort of, it leans heavily on this aspect that like only the devil can haunt Christians. Only the Catholic ways and the Catholic prayers and the Catholic priest can really drive out this spirit, or it's, affecting him so much. Did you have any like other thoughts about that in particular?
Yeah. Now that you're saying that, sorry that I almost interrupted you.
No, it's okay.
In this moment of the 70s, isn't that like kind of when the Catholic Church had a cultural crisis and they were trying to, deal with the fact that people were just leaving the church in droves at that time specifically?
They were trying to be a little bit more progressive, and they actually make a mention of it in the movie that Father Delaney, who's the one affected by the house, he didn't think that the new Vatican, which was called Vatican II, which was like more progressive, and they started opening up a bit, and they were just like getting out of the dark ages, so to speak, that one of the priests that's reprimanding him says, oh, for somebody who didn't think Vatican II didn't go far enough, you sure sound like a crazy person.
Right.
So like he's supposed to be really progressive and wanting to push forward this sort of narrative that the church needs to be, get with the times or whatever.
Well, now that we are saying that, some of the things that were sort of religious iconography kind of makes sense in that context when you think about, okay, what is this film really, really talking about? You and I talked a lot about people's distrust of the government during this time and different things like that, but I do think that it's trying to make a statement about people wrenching themselves from like these religious, I guess, rituals and customs, and sort of what that looks like to like tear yourself away from it, and like what are the consequences.
Maybe the movie is leaning towards a sort of chastising in a way, like this is what happens when you lean from God.
That's
you
sort
like
of
sort
what
of
it felt like now that we're talking it through.
Mm-hmm.
Only because there were some parts of it that just felt so over the top, like the mother being basically dressed in a Catholic schoolgirl uniform
Right.
in a few parts of the movie, and like just having all these big crosses all over the place that didn't seem to advance the plot in any way.
Like she's never really shown praying except for one scene.
No. And the little girl is singing "Jesus Loves Me."
Right, exactly. And they do spend a lot of time. When I rewatched it, I had forgotten how much of the subplot of the priest there is that goes absolutely nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he ends up blind, but that's it. He has no resolution. Like it's not like he regains his sight after they leave the house or, you know, anything like that. But they devote maybe a 15-minute scene to him, which I think is like the best scene in the movie because the guy Rod Steiger that plays the priest is awesome in that scene where he's like, I'm not crazy, it's the devil. Like in that scene, you're like, for God's sakes, help him. Let him help. If one of your priests is so convinced that someone in their parish is in trouble, like why wouldn't you devote everything, even if you're just trying to like debunk him, but just be like, yeah, let's go. If these people are in trouble, we can't look like we're turning our back.
You know, the only character in the movie that's innocent and like in the eyes of God is like an innocent, good person is the little girl, and she's like protected from the evilness of the house, right? Because she is singing "Jesus Loves Me." She's like not behaving badly. She's not remarrying after a divorce. She's also
sort of treating the ghost or the spirit with like respect.
Yeah,
almost like she's not afraid of it because the spirit is like, why does everybody run from me? And then I get angry and then I make them do things because they're not my friend. And the little girl's like, well, I don't care who you are, what you look like.
Although she did lock the babysitter in the closet.
That's true. Yeah, she really did what Jody told her.
She was very obedient.
Yeah, Jody told me open up this bank account.
Isn't obedience like sort of a virtue in that way?
What do you mean?
Isn't obedience like commonly thought of as like a religious, like pious virtue?
Oh, right. Like you're obedient to whatever God you may worship, and in a way, she was obedient to the devil or this demonic spirit, but she was just doing what her mom would do in her church setting.
Right.
You know, she learned from her mom, who Margot Kidder, you know, is supposed to be very, very religious, so religious that George changes his religion from whatever religion he was.
But she's divorced and remarried, or possibly widowed and remarried.
Yeah.
It's never addressed, but...
At one point, George, I believe he says, like, well, their father's not around. Their real father's not around.
Yeah.
So it makes it sound like maybe he passed away.
Oh, I think that sounds like their real father left.
I figured just because, like, we had talked about the whole Catholic thing and the annulment and, like, kind of the, you know, that climate in the 70s of, like, how that was so blasphemous. And
yeah.
You know,
and also in the 70s is when people really started getting divorces like crazy, and, like, possibly that's the reason why a lot of people started stepping away from the church at that point, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. Religion and like the governmental aspect of the legal aspect of like the marriage, that people realize like, oh, I can just go to the government and get that divorce, and I don't need the church to say, you know, why do I care what the church has to say?
Yeah.
You know, they sort of like realize like, oh, I'm not going to be punished if I do this.
Right.
You know, like Catholicism is a lot about the guilt that you carry around for like everything.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, how do you reconcile that? Like, how do you say that you're sorry and then you make up for that, your penance, like your reconciliation, all that sort of stuff. But I think people just sort of had enough with the archaic sort of like, you know, I mean, they were still doing like the Latin Mass until they said, hey, you can actually do that in English. It doesn't have to be in Latin, you know?
Yeah. Also, this was during a time in American history specifically, but I guess in all of Western history, where women were just becoming more independent, and like this religion doesn't necessarily work for them anymore.
Right.
Doesn't suit their needs or lifestyle, so you got to step away.
Mm-hmm. There are some things that I want to continue talking about the Amityville Horror, but I'm also going to connect it to our next movie. So before we talk about any of that, what would your rating
Oh, yeah.
On your holistic scale, what would your rating be for the Amityville Horror?
You know, we really got to figure out what we're rating here. I know I'm saying it's holistic, like, as a whole. 1, the enjoyment of watching it. 2, the technical quality of the movie.
Okay.
3, is it scary or not?
Oh, yes.
Doi.
My God, I forgot. It's the whole point.
1, my enjoyment of watching it with you, 6.5 to a 7.
Okay.
Pretty good. There were some boring parts.
It does drag a little bit, yeah.
I'll say 6.5.
I'm not gonna argue with any of these scores.
I know,
just so
I
you
know. I'm just hashing it out.
Okay.
2, is it scary? Out of 10, I'll give it a 2.5.
Really?
Not scary at all.
I thought you were
to
gonna say
me.
0.
No, there was. I mean, I have a vivid imagination, so suggesting a scary scenario to me, I could like take it and run with it in my mind's eye. And how it's done as a whole, I think for the time, it's pretty darn good. The acting is pretty good. Not scary, but
It's not scary, but I do think James Brolin was really good in it.
I agree. I think he was good, and I actually think Margot Kidder pretty good.
Yeah, she doesn't have a whole lot to do, but she's not relegated to like this woman who just screams and screams.
Right.
She's more affected on a cerebral level, where it like just gets to the point where then finally at the end of the movie she can actually react.
On technical merit, 7.
I remember that you said that you really liked the blood effects when it was
did.
coming down the stairs.
I did.
That's really cool. I like that.
All right, give it a 7.5.
Okay. And my favorite part, the part where he falls down the stairs into the blood, is just so like it has like this great sound effect. It's like
Yeah,
it's really
good.
cool. Oh, and 10 out of 10 for the dog. We should have a dog rating.
Yeah.
If there's a dog in the movie, we should rate the dog.
Well, 10. A dog always gets 10 out of 10.
Well, I think Harry gets an 11 out of 10 because he rescued
That's right.
George at the end. Even though he thought he was a bad guy at first because he's biting him and George is like, no, it's me. And then Harry's like, oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah. It's you.
You give me my sausages.
You know, I just remembered something else that we were talking about this movie that, like, further solidifies my new opinion that what this movie is truly about is people leaving the church or feeling uncomfortable in their religion. The thought that we were talking about feeling not at home in your home. And, like, what else could a home mean? It could mean your religion, right?
Right, yes. Because a lot of people find comfort
Yes.
in their priest or their church or their sanctuary or whatever the
Yes.
case may be.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So, like, if you think about that movie, the theme of the movie is being not at home in your home. To me, that's a clear link to people being uncomfortable and, like, moving away from their religious upbringing.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the movie is exactly like you said, like being afraid of home, but also like you're in your home where you're supposed to be safe, but you're not safe, but you're also not safe with God either.
Right.
Like imagine how like if you're very religious and you're like, God will be by my side, and the devil's like, nothing can save you. In this place that you think is so safe, literally nothing can save you.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty scary. Like to
Yeah.
be back against the wall and you're like, I got nowhere to go. I can't fall on my religion. I can't fall on my bravado.
Right.
You know, like that's it. I'm done.
Can't follow my Jesus haircut.
Yeah. Do you think James Brolin had a Jesus haircut?
Yeah. I mean, 1970s American Jesus haircut.
Ah, right. That's right. Because that's how we all know Jesus the best.
It's my favorite Jesus. No,
Oh,
it's
he's-
not. That's such a lie. It's so not my favorite Jesus.
Jesus is like David Bowie. He would change his look every like 4 or 5 years.
Power of voodoo.
So to transition into the movie that we're going to talk this week, it's actually somewhat connected in a few ways. One, it takes place in a house, in an old house.
Okie doke.
2, it involves a family with multiple children.
Okay.
3, it also takes place in the 70s, but it was not made in the 70s. It was made in 2013. It's also supposedly based on a true story.
But it's not actually, though.
It is. It is based on a true story. Like, I mean, supposedly in that you have to take it all with a grain of salt.
Oh, okay.
Some people said that this happened, just like the Amityville Horror. Other people say, of course, no, it didn't. You know, that kind of based on a true story. It's not like, you know.
I'm kind of scared right now. Also,
Well-
I remember you talking to Jackie about this, and you didn't let me hear what you were saying, but just the look on your face made me scared.
Okay, well, because after we talked about the Amityville Horror, and right away, like, even after we were talking about it, you're like, I don't think this is going to be scary. So my goal was to actually find something that was scary.
I know. I'm
And
worried.
I'm not doing this to be mean, but I do want to find out, like, what really does scare you, so like we can sort of deconstruct that and be able to watch like other movies. Like
Yeah.
if you can figure it out, then there's some movies out there that have really scary parts. But if you know sort of what's going to happen or maybe desensitized to it, you could be like, oh, this is actually a good movie beneath all this kind of maybe these cheap scares or like this sort of, So that's where I left off. But what did you want to say?
I guess I just wanted to say little birds getting pushed out of the nest.
No, 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 I don't wanna. No, no, oh, no, no, no. Huh?
Well, I think I just haven't been trying hard enough.
No, you
I
really
picked-
have been very, very gentle with
Yeah,
me.
we're sort of, this is like going up the roller coaster
I'm
little by
getting
little.
cocky.
Yeah.
I'm like, none of this is scary. This is ridiculous.
But I think the movies that we've watched have really given you a good insight to a lot of like just technical filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one way to sort of understand like what makes scary movies scary.
Yeah.
Is the technical way they present, the movie. Even though it was made in 2013, this movie has a very 70s style to it. The cinematography is really great. There's some really cool camera moves that they do in this. A lot of like sort of long takes, like where they're moving through the house and it's just like all one long shot and there's like kind of a bunch of stuff happening all at once. A lot of great like framing, just like where things are in the frame to get you to look somewhere. There's a lot of false starts in this movie in terms of the scares, where they do like, oh, you think something scary is going to pop out, but it doesn't. But then later they do the same action and then something scary happens.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that this movie is great, but
Ringing endorsement.
well, just a lot of the horror movies that are made today, I just think are very just poorly made.
Yeah.
This one, I think, is the best of like this new sort of crop of horror, the way they're doing horror movies now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was obviously led to this whole new genre of the way they do it. It inspired like the Insidious series. They've made like 3 movies from that. Like, all these types of like, they seem just like movies of the week, but they make like, $200 million on like a really small budget.
Okay.
The other way that this movie connects to the Amityville Horror is that Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are famous ghost hunters, investigated both houses.
But this is not Annabelle?
No, this is not Annabelle.
Okay.
The movie we're going to be talking about today is called The Conjuring.
Oh, okay. I've heard of it.
So just like
But again, don't know anything about it.
Okay. I actually saw this movie in the theater, and it was actually, to see it in the theater makes it, I think, more enjoyable than seeing it on a small screen, because it's a very simple sort of movie. There's not like too many special effects. Everything's pretty practical. There's a couple of crappy CGI parts, but it doesn't really ruin the movie like, the fake pig at the end of Amityville Horror.
Oh, yeah. That was so silly.
The Conjuring was directed by this guy, James Wan, who's famous for starting the Saw series.
Mm-hmm.
He created the first one. Patrick Wilson plays Ed Warren, the ghost hunter in The Conjuring. Kind of has like this weird way of speaking where he's kind of like,
Yeah, he's like a little bit wishy-washy.
yeah.
Huh.
And he's kind of always squinting in this movie.
Yeah.
Like he needs glasses, but they're like, you can't wear glasses because Ed Warren didn't wear glasses. So a little bit about Ed and Lorraine Warren, because this movie is a lot about them, more so than you would think based on like the trailers.
So Ed and Lorraine Warren are not the people that lived in the Amityville Horror House?
No, the Lutzes lived in the Amityville Horror House, and the
right.
DeFeo family was the one that died.
Right.
But they investigated it. And before I watched The Conjuring, I actually watched and read a bunch of interviews with Ed and Lorraine about the Amityville Horror and the movie we're going to talk about, like their real experiences.
Well, geez, they
in the
just like
house.
hung out on Long Island, looked for haunted things to like certify haunted or not.
Well, the Conjuring actually takes place in Rhode Island.
Oh, they went to a different island.
Yeah. This one had a bunch of roads on it.
Yeah,
I
not
don't-
quite as long.
Do you know anything about this couple?
No,
No? Okay. Other than their, reported ghosts.
other than
ghost
their
hunters.
ghost certifiers that are reportedly also total hoaxers.
Ghost certifies are like their notary public.
Yeah,
Ed Warren. Oh, Ed. World War II veteran, police officer,
nice guy.
very nice guy, self-proclaimed demonologist.
I mean, it's not like you could get a
Who's-
certificate for that.
And who's going to refute that?
They're like, okay, he seems like he knows what he's talking about. I've never heard somebody say that they are that before, so I guess he's an expert.
Lorraine
I'm gonna marry you someday, Lorraine!
claimed to be clairvoyant.
It's really lucky for them that they found each other, huh?
Exactly. There's also a cheesy bit in the movie that we will come back to later about fate and all that stuff in them meeting. So hold on to that
Okay.
joke. I also watched a lot of interviews with like police officers who worked the Amityville Horror case. A lot of the mystery behind it is, why didn't the family wake up
Right.
after they heard the shots? And there's a lot of conspiracy theories. They never actually proved anything other than Ronald DeFeo confessed to it. He outright confessed to it. But there's some theories that him and his sister conspired to kill the family, that him and some friends did it. They held them down. And
Wait, what happened to his sister?
He ended up killing her too.
Oh.
So like they went into a pact, but then he killed her to like get rid of any evidence.
Kind of rude.
Yeah.
Talk about sibling rivalry.
Apparently, though, Ronald DeFeo had threatened his dad before with a gun, and when he pulled the trigger, the gun didn't go off. So his dad like found religion like really quickly after that, and there's just like a very heavy background of drinking and violence and drugs, and he was like, you know, one of those stereotypical loners, and you know, he had just had a real bad temper. And this sort of thing was like a culmination of that. Like he just got to a point where he might have argued with his dad and he just flipped out.
Dad, go to hell, I'm taller than you!
But he claimed that, you know, voices made him do it. So
Right.
Who knows what's going on in there. And Lorraine Warren claims that, you know, there was something inhuman inside the house. And it was actually, I believe it was Kathy Lutz who was the one who claimed that it was built on an Indian burial ground. You know, she sort of stoked those flames in that way. And, you know, Lorraine Warren was like, yeah, sure. That's exactly what happened. Before I go any further, I forgot to mention who else is in this movie. Ron Livingston.
Really?
Yeah, he plays the dad.
You know I love Ron Livingston.
I know. Lily Taylor. I don't know if you know who she is.
I love Lily Taylor. She was also in The Haunting of Hill House.
Yes, she was.
And she's in 6 Feet Under.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, she plays the mom.
Is that helpful to make you want to watch 6 Feet Under with me?
No. Good try, though. And Lorraine Warren is played by Vera Farmiga.
Oh, yeah. She looked totally different in the movie.
Yeah, departed a long time ago. It's like 13 years ago.
Yeah. You know, she was like the most dense, dumb, silly psychiatrist in that movie. She like didn't get any of like the clues.
She has none of the grace or fortitude of Dr. Melfi.
I was just going to say, she's no Dr. Melfi.
No, Dr. Melfi's the best TV psychiatrist I think that's ever existed.
You know, I was thinking about that this morning, like how much I was praising Dr. Melfi, which if you listeners don't know who we're talking about, this is Tony Soprano's therapist.
Go back to Miami and play volleyball, whatever the fuck it is you do down there.
I was just like really thinking about how amazing of a therapist she is, and then I remembered she's not real.
No.
They wrote her.
Yeah.
She's a character.
But that's how good the writing is, that they actually take the time
Yeah.
to really game all this kind of stuff out and
Yeah.
make you think that she's actually analyzing it.
Makes you think like, oh my god, she's such a good therapist. I
Yeah.
can't believe she connected those dots so quick. But it's believable.
Yeah.
Because they wrote her perfectly.
I don't give too much of a shit.
I love Dr. Melfi.
Later that same evening.
So you were right that this movie is connected to Annabelle, because Annabelle was a case that the Warrens did investigate.
Okay.
But the movie, The Conjuring, starts off with a photo of Annabelle. We're introduced to these two women and this guy. The Warrens are doing an audio interview with them, and they're asking, like, tell us about the Annabelle doll. And the two women who are nursing students, either nursing students or nurses, one of those two, they would be like, oh, at first, like a hand or a foot would just move on the doll. It eventually gets to this point where it just moved completely into another room. Like they'd leave it and it'd be like sitting in a chair, just like looking at them when they came in the door. The nursing students claim that a girl named Annabelle Higgins died in the apartment that they're living in when she was 7,
How do they know that?
because the doll was speaking to something was speaking to them. The nursing student said, go into the doll so that we can communicate with you. Ed and Lorraine are like, you know, it's not the doll that's possessed. It's this spirit that's here. You know, like the doll doesn't move around because there's something inside, you know, possessing it. It's simply like a spirit just picking it up and moving it around.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, you made a big no-no by telling it to get into the doll because you're acknowledging its existence. Almost like if you ignore it, if you don't let it get to you, it has no power over you in a way.
Way to victim blame. Like, you guys made a real big mistake.
Well, the nurses have this
You really brought this haunting on yourself.
way to go. Women of the early 70s.
Yeah.
Or I think it's 69 is when the Annabelle case was.
Okay.
The nurses are like, we help people. We just want to help. The dialogue's not that great in this movie, by the way. You know, they claim that the spirit, this 7-year-old girl was lonely, sort of in the way that Jody was sort of lonely looking for a friend. And this is sort of why, you know, they took to it and like, oh, go into the doll. Like, you know, we'll take care of you. We're nurses. Then we're treated to like these flashbacks of like things that have happened in the apartment with the doll. They come home and they open the door. The nurses open the door and there's a note on the floor that just says, miss me, ? And it's like written in like a little kid would write it. It It's like on a scrap of paper. They look down the hallway, and the Annabelle doll is sitting in the hallway, and it has a bunch of crayons in its hand, like red crayons, the same crayon that they used on the note. There's like a noise that comes from like kind of a spare room, and they go inside, and it's like completely trashed. All the furniture's on the floor,
And a whole lot of crazy crap on the walls.
all their photos have been like, their faces have been scratched out of it, and there's like crayon all over the wall and all over the ceiling, and it just says like "Miss Me?" ? And it's just like all over, and there's like a light bulb that's like flickering. It's like
For some reason, this creeps me out so much more than the Amityville Horror.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a modern horror movie. They really set you up with the music and the cinematography. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but in the Amityville Horror, there's not too many scenes that take place like in real darkness.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the horror happens during the day. With this, it's, you know, there's like stuff that's being lit only by a match, you know, or like a single flashlight. There's like a lot of stuff like that in this movie. So they see all this crap all over the walls and all the broken stuff, and they just throw the doll in the dumpster. Later that night...
Big mistake. Huge.
Well, absolutely, because later that night they're sleeping and they hear this banging on the front door. Like a monster is trying to get in, just like boom, boom, boom.
Annabelle.
They open up the door and they find on the ground the note that says, "Miss me?" One of the girls is like backing up because she's like, "Oh my God." And then there's like a sound from like a closet that's near her. She opens it up and you don't see what's inside, but you have to assume that the Annabelle doll is in there. And it cuts back to the interview that the Warrens are giving or are taking from them. Ed and Lorraine think that the spirit is like an inhuman essence, which they described as a sort of a demonic force that's never taken human form before. It's never been a human. It's not somebody who died and is a ghost. It's simply something evil that exists. Then they sort of reaffirmed that the doll itself wasn't possessed, but that it wanted to get inside the nursing students' souls. It wanted to break them down to a point where they were so weak that it could sort of infect them.
Okay, but this doesn't really make sense because if it could be like any inanimate object, it clearly like quote unquote chose an object with a human form.
Right.
Which doesn't make sense if it's not possessing the doll. Like it could have chosen a chair or whatever. It clearly chose a doll for like its human like capabilities, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, what's scarier than something that looks like a human that is inanimate but then moves on its own?
I don't know. It could have possessed a dog or
That's
what
true.
have you.
What's that name again? I forgot.
Hey, I'm a dog.
A scary dog.
Scary dog. Scary dog.
Yeah.
Give me a treat.
Yeah.
Demons gotta eat.
Yeah, or it could have possessed a human.
Well, that's the thing, is that it was breaking the girls down. And we'll go over this later, the 3 steps of haunting, which they go over. But sort of breaking them down to then take over, you know, in this sort of mysticism of possessions and exorcisms. It's very much rooted on the fact that the demon just can't come into your body. You have to be weak,
Yeah.
like physically weak. Like it's limited, you know, sort of to what it can enter.
Well, that's like kind of a primordial belief that we have, right? Sickness and weakness of mind and body and character can only enter your body if you like let it.
Right.
By being not vigilant about your health, by like being not having emotional, mental, or religious fortitude.
Being like passive in every aspect of your life, sort of.
Bad things befall you if you are not vigilant at all moments.
And this actually, I would hold on to this conversation because we'll talk about it later. It's going to come up. But some little nugget to like get you thinking that a lot of these movies, the person being possessed, like outright possessed, is a woman.
Yeah.
Sort of how the woman is sort of generally the more religious type person who may be weaker, easier prey, like sort of that theme that crops up a lot in horror movies. These like Exorcist, it's a little girl.
Well, also
you
just
know?
because like I think in our society we like love to watch women be tortured. So in most of the horror movies that we've seen, there's like a feebleness of mind that's associated with the women.
Right.
In I think every horror movie that we've seen so far.
The character has to do something stupid. They have to go into the room when they're not supposed to.
Right.
They have to make a loud sound when they're not supposed to. You know, like that sort of trope to move the story along.
Even though like everything that they've been given for their whole life, every message that they've received from their culture is like two-sided, right? One, you need to be soft and generous and welcoming and polite. And the other one is like, you need to be vigilant. You need to have your boundaries up and your guard up at all times. The world is out to get you. So all horror movies that have women at the center of them are like always the protagonist walking this thin line. And if you step out of line, you're haunted by a ghost. or if you step out of line, you're murdered by a satanic cult or what have you. But they always end up being punished for not being able to perfectly walk this line of like being both polite and vigilant.
This whole interview with these nursing students in the Warrens actually turns out to be a film strip. And so the film kind of goes like, and the projector powers down, and they're giving a talk, and they have passed out these pamphlets where they claim to be the seekers of the supernatural. And they're talking to just like a bunch of, college kids. They're asking all these kind of inane questions like, where's the Annabelle doll now? And Ed is like, oh, it's in a safe spot in their house. So they collect all these relics from all the cases that they've had, and they put them in a special storage room in their house. Here's one of the parts that I don't like about the logic of this movie. Even though they keep all of these relics from these past investigations in their home, they're still like haunted, or they claim that they're still haunted. So they have a priest come and bless them regularly.
Oh my God.
So it's like, why wouldn't you just take a priest to every haunting if that's the key to keeping all these things at bay? It's kind of they try to follow it up later with like, well, to do an exorcism, you have to have the Vatican support. And it's just kind of like a way for them to like throw a wrench into the middle of everything.
By the time all these relics come to their house, they've already been subdued enough that like a simple priest could just take care of it.
I guess, but they keep the Annabelle doll locked in like a glass case that has like a lock on it.
Come on, get over yourselves.
Yeah, it's kind of stupid. Somebody in the audience is like, well, what are you guys? Meaning like, what do you call like your profession? And
that's kind of a strange question for midway through their talk.
Yeah, I know. Why am I here?
Who are you people?
Did you not read what the ticket said?
Right. He's like, I thought we were going to see Andy Kaufman. Ed describes themselves as demonologists, ghost hunters, paranormal investigators. And then they do this really cheesy freeze frame where they do this like newspaper effect where it looks like the little dots, like the little dots of ink, like sort of making them like an old newspaper photograph.
Yeah.
And then all this text starts to come up on the screen. And it says like Ed and Lorraine are world renowned, that Lorraine is clairvoyant, and that Ed is the only non-ordained demonologist recognized by the Catholic Church. But they claim that this case that the movie is based on was so malevolent that they hadn't said anything about it until right now.
Okay.
And then one of the things that I do like about this movie is as the text is like this weird yellow, like kind of typewriter typeface. Mm-hmm. And as it's scrolling up, the title of the movie scrolls up with it. And it's like these big yellow kind of like just classic kind of Times New Roman-esque kind of just very like elegant font. And
hey,
it just
at least
says,
it's not papyrus.
No, it's not Papyrus, it's not Comic Sans, it's not Helvetica, it's not Verdana, it's none of that. But it says The Conjuring in these big letters, and it's just like the music's like swelling, it's like, and it's like rising up. And then the actual movie starts to rise with it, and it replaces the title with the interior of the house that the story's going to take place in. Okay. It's a really cool, like, you know how in The House of the Devil, they did the freeze frame? And it's like The House of the Devil, and it had like copyright. The way The Conjuring does it, it's like very similar to like, it's like a very 70s style. It really sort of tries to root itself in old style filmmaking, but bringing on like sort of the new horror twists that we know of as kind of like, all right, enough already horror of today. Mm-hmm. When the film rises up to the, from the text to the actual film, we're inside the house and it's 1971 and we're in Rhode Island. The Perone family is moving into this house.
Eva Perone's family?
No, Roger and Carolyn.
Oh.
Again, Ron Livingston and Lily Taylor. And they have 5 daughters. And they have
a dog. They kept trying for that son.
Yep. He's like, I'm never going to have an heir.
Yeah.
And so 5 girls and a dog named Sadie, who's like this really cute Australian Shepherd kind of collie mix. Mm-hmm. They're moving into this creepy house. Like, this is another problem that I have with these movies. The house is already creepy. Mm-hmm. So you're primed for creepy things to happen. You know, like the Amityville Horror, like the house is kind of in disarray, but it's like a house that looks like somebody hasn't lived in it in a year. In The Conjuring, it's like moldy and creepy, and there's like Spanish moss everywhere and vine. It's like, all right, I get it. It's a creepy house. Mm-hmm. The house in the movie looks nothing like the real house. They're both supposed to be these 14-room farmhouses.
Okay.
Huge house.
What do you do with 14 rooms?
I guess if you have 5 girls.
Okay, so that's 5 rooms.
Plus the bedroom, 6, and then you have a living room.
They each had their own room?
In the movie, 2 girls share a room. Because I think there's only 5 bedrooms, but there's 9 other rooms. Like there's a study, a living room, a dining room, an entryway. There's like a lot of different other rooms.
Okay.
So as soon as they get out of the car, everybody's like rushing inside. They can't wait to move into this old creepy house. As every dog is wont to do, does not want to go in the house because it's very scared and it's crying. And even when Roger grabs her collar, and he's like, come on inside. She just resists, and she will not go inside the house.
Dogs are too good for us.
I know. Like, listen to the dog.
We don't deserve a dog.
Then they do this sort of really cheesy unpacking scene where they're playing that song Time of the Season.
Yeah.
The way it's shot is very interesting. It's like this one long take where camera starts outside and there's like movers and the camera's going under a couch as they're carrying it inside, and it's like floating left and right and going through the entire house. It's all one scene and everybody's doing something different and the house looks alive. But the fact that they're playing Time of the Season and they're doing like these all like, everybody says like something cheesy, like they're all like way too excited, and it's just kind of ruins the experience. You're like, this is like forced trying to sympathize with this family because this is the first scene that we meet them in.
Mm-hmm.
That aspect I don't like about it. Like, nobody's that happy on moving day.
I was happy on moving day.
That's true.
Because you did all the moving.
But
true. I was just happy to move in with you.
So the technical aspect is really cool. I like that. The Time of the Season, they could have picked a song that, that nobody knows.
It's such a random choice.
I know, and it's just like, ugh. It reminds me of so much of like San Francisco.
Yeah.
That, and not like New England. April is the youngest child. She's sitting outside in the back by this really, really creepy, tall, amazingly huge tree that's has like these gangly branches that like sort of like reach over this dock area and a small boat, and then there's like water. There's like a big lake. So this plot that they have is really big, and it borders this lake. So she's sitting at the tree. She's like, look what I found. And it's a music box. And the top pops open, and the top is like a circus tent top, kind of like an umbrella. It has like, the different like folds in it. And she's looking at it. It's like playing music. And then she looks behind her, and then she just goes, and then she looks in the thing, and then she closes it, and she runs inside. Later that night, they're still kind of unpacking, and the family plays this game of hide and seek where they blindfold one person, and everybody hides, but then the person who's blindfolded has a chance to ask all the people who are hiding to clap. So they're like walking, and they're like, okay, I don't know where anybody is. So they're like, okay, first clap, and then everybody has to go. And then she's like, oh, okay, I hear them, so I'm moving towards that sound.
That's what you were miming with Jackie on the train.
Yeah, exactly, because there's a scary part with the clapping.
Yeah.
They twirl this one girl, and then they all run, and they hide. And, the claps are like the little hints. We'll get to all the girls' names eventually, but like they don't say them right away, so I just wrote like girl, but eventually like I'll tell you who that is. So the girl who's blindfolded finds her sister in this closet, and she opens the door, and the girl's like standing in the corner, and she's like, she knows she's there, but she like, okay, clap, and she claps loudly. And then she goes to tag her, but she kind of goes in like real heavy. She's like, yeah, and she tags her, and one of the boards in the walls breaks, and it falls through, and there's like a big hole in the wall. Roger goes in, and he's like, there's something like down here. There's something here, and all the boards start to kind of come loose. He takes all the boards out, and he reveals that there's a basement that somehow they didn't know about in this house. One of the daughters gets a box of matches, and he takes like 2 of them, he lights them, and he walks down to the basement, and there's old furniture, like antique furniture, and there's like an old piano, and there's just all this stuff, and like there's a furnace down there, so that they had no idea even existed, but now technically it's theirs because they own the house. He leaves the matchbook or the matchbox on the stairs.
I'm getting kind of scared right now.
Well, the movie moves really. The movie's like an hour and 50 minutes, but it moves really quickly, which I appreciate. There's no sort of lull, so I feel like this particular podcast is going to go quickly because it's just going to be like one thing after another. But we're going to get to the scary stuff pretty soon. So he leaves the matchbox on the stairs, and then he goes outside and he closes the door into the hallway. So remember that the box of matches is there, because later you'll be like, how is that possible? It's because he left it there because he has to. So later in the movie, somebody else can find it. That night, the dog, Sadie, is barking outside, and they're like, why is she barking? And they're like, well, maybe because she's outside. And he's like, he'll be fine. Or she'll be fine, rather. The next morning, the mom, Carolyn, wakes up, and she's got bruises all over her arms and legs. Not just like developing bruises, but bruises that look like they've been there for a few days. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of like yellowing, and the makeup's really great because she's pretty frail in the movie. So like her skin is like kind of thin, and she just looks like, ugh, that looks like it hurts. She goes into all the kids' rooms and she checks on them because it's like the first night that they've spent in the house. And she's like, how did everybody sleep? And then they kind of realize that the house is like real drafty and real cold, and they didn't realize that it was going to be so cold, even though this is, I believe, supposed to be November in New Hampshire. Roger's in the basement, and he's like kind of surveying all the furniture. He's trying to get the furnace to work and all that kind of stuff. He drives a big rig That's like his job.
Breaker one, this is the bandit, it's a snowman out there. Am I hitting you, son? Mercy sakes, you put about 8.5 on me. Blowing the windows down, bring it on.
But he's like also like really handy, like he's fixing up like an old car.
I cannot imagine Ron Livingston driving a big rig.
You don't really see him drive it. You see him pull up for like a second.
I can't even imagine him like riding in a big rig or like driving any car.
Yeah, he's so like sarcastic that you couldn't imagine him being like breaker.
I just imagine him as a lifelong New Yorker, like public transportation only.
Yeah. He also has one of the worst haircuts. I think it's a wig, but it's god awful. It makes him look like Justin Bieber combed all his hair down.
What?
Like around. It's real bad.
Can't wait.
He's great in it, and Lily Taylor's awesome in it. I think they tried to make him too much in the 70s, and they went a little overboard instead of just making him look natural.
They like made him look like a Party City 70s guy.
Yeah, sort of. Carolyn, on her way into the basement before she goes to check on Roger, she notices that all the clocks in the house have stopped at 3:07.
Oh, this again.
Yeah, I know. Talk about Ed and Lorraine Warren similarities, you know?
They're like, it's so weird. Every single haunting that we've uncovered happens around 3 to 3:30 in the morning.
It's the witching hour.
It's the witching hour.
April, the youngest girl, comes into the kitchen and she's like, I want to see Sadie, the dog. Mm-hmm. And the mom's like, oh, she's outside. She's probably hungry. She goes outside and the dog is dead.
You just said that with like, it just sounded so real when you said it. She goes outside and the dog is dead.
I mean,
you're never going to believe this, but the dog is dead.
If you're watching the movie and you don't realize that the dog is going to be dead real quick, as soon as it won't go inside the house.
Right.
That, like, you know, there's no way that you wouldn't get that. They set it up so cheesily, I guess, if you want to say. It's also, like, so predictable.
Like, I mean, first of all, who leaves their dog out overnight?
A lot of people do.
That's crazy.
I think in the 70s, that was like, you know, people would travel with, like, dogs in a crate on top of their car when they went on road trips.
What the hell?
Yeah.
That's a crazy thing to do.
I know. It was the 70s. It's fast and loose.
I mean, your dog probably had a 6-hour panic attack.
That's true. So the dog is dead. We then cut to Ed and Lorraine Warren's home in Connecticut. Ed is showing around this reporter, taking this guy around, and they go into the relic room where they have all of their artifacts that they've collected from all their cases, all the spooky stuff. Mm-hmm. The reporter is, like, not a skeptic. He's really into the idea, which is kind of why Ed is, like, being a little bit more, like, forthcoming with him. Like, the guy's, like, really interested in what Ed is doing. Ed reveals, like, that the artifacts are blessed, like, once a month by this priest.
You got to keep up with your monthly blessing if you fall behind.
Exactly. You got to throw the priest a little coin. He comes around, throws a little holy water, says a few words. Easy. Make a couple of bucks.
Yeah, those haunted weeds just, like, outgrow you if you don't keep trimming them back.
The Annabelle doll is, of course, in this glass cage, sitting on, like, a chair.
Yeah,
like
I've
they
seen
propped
a
her
photo
up.
Of it.
Yeah, it's so, like,
it's very,
it's
like,
playing right into the audience's hand.
Yeah,
it's like you want to see this like this.
Yeah. Instead
of it being like they threw the doll in there and they locked it because the you know the chest has some sort of power that's keeping it at bay. And it's just, like, slumped on it. I think that'd be more creepy if it's, like, slumped on its side, just, like, looking at you.
Yeah.
You know, they took the time to, like, make it look like it's some sort of relic. But it's supposed to be a thing inside of it that could kill you. And they're propping it up like it's like, oh, those were just my grandmother's dolls.
Yeah.
The reporter's like, how do you prevent these spirits from latching on to yourself and Lorraine? And Ed's like, well, we have to take great precaution. And then doesn't tell him how they take great precaution.
Well, it's a trade secret.
Yeah, he's like, we take great precaution. And then I wrote down, what? Because he doesn't follow through.
They just rub themselves with static guard.
They just
and
Scotch
like,
guard.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
37 seconds later.
So Ed confesses to the reporter that something happened to Lorraine during their last exorcism that really freaked her out. And before he can, like, kind of finish, like, his sentence, his daughter Judy is, like, sneaking around into this relic room, and they do this thing where it's like, you know, from down low, the camera's down low, and it's like looking at them, and you're like, oh no, it's like a creature that's gonna, and it's like just his daughter. They live with their with Lorraine's mom, Georgiana. Ed's like, Georgiana, get her out of here. You know you're not supposed to be in here because all these things, you're vulnerable, you're a little girl, all these things can attach to you at any moment. Then they have this weird scene where Ed brings Lorraine, like, tea. Ed's like, you shouldn't blame yourself for what happened, like, during the exorcism. And the scene literally goes nowhere. It's just, like, him to be sympathetic towards her. And then you're like, oh, I want to know more about that exorcism, even though you sort of already want to know about it already. We go back to the house, and it's 3:07. and all the clocks stop. One of the daughters is in bed, and the camera slowly moves from like the bottom of the door and slowly rises up over her and just kind of hangs on her for a little bit. And then you don't see what, but something grabs her leg and pulls her just a little bit down the bed. She kind of like kicks her feet, and she's like, Nancy, who's one of the other sisters, quit it. But Nancy like doesn't wake up. And then it happens again a little bit further, and she wakes up and she's like, stop farting. And they smell this sort of like sulfur smell, which, you know, from all the other movies we've seen signifies that like a demon or the devil,
right,
you know, is a presence in the house. We cut downstairs and Roger has fallen.
Stop farting.
Yeah, it's actually a great line.
Yeah.
Roger's asleep downstairs at a desk, and there's this TV that's on. It's just static. He wakes up and he hears thumping upstairs. And then he hears the door creaking. He walks up to the TV and it shuts off, and it of course makes the sound that you love. He walks into the hallway, and this door at the far end that leads into the kitchen just goes like, it just opens on its own.
This is already so much scarier than Amityville.
Yeah, because the way they film it, it's like all dark, and you know, the music, it's making a concerted effort to scare you, you know, rather than trying to build like this world that you might think is creepy. It's specifically designed to, you know, lead you into the scare. He goes into the doorway and he's in the kitchen and there's nothing there, and then he hears like this thumping again upstairs, and he walks down the hallway, and then he goes up the stairs, and there's like this girl standing there, one of his daughters, but it's like kind of like this, and you just see her and she's kind of like pops into frame. That girl's name is Andrea, and she's standing on the stairs, and she says Cindy, one of the other sisters, is sleepwalking again. Cindy walked from her own room into Andrea's room. So Roger's like, okay, let's go get her. And Andrea's like, well, I didn't want to wake her because you said never to wake her. And he's like, it's okay, we'll just take her back to bed. And what she's doing is this giant wardrobe, just like Tale of Two Sisters. Her head is down, and she's just walking into it over and over again. So it's going like, like over and over again.
So their names are now Andrea, Nancy, Cindy.
April is the little girl,
April.
and then there's another girl, Christine. The next morning, Carolyn gets out of the shower, and Roger's like, oh, you've got another bruise on your back. And it's like this huge purple bruise. Make sure that you go to a doctor.
Put some arnica on that thing.
Yeah. Slap some dirt, rub some dirt on it,
Yeah.
and you'll be okay. This is where we figure out that Roger is a trucker, and he's going to be gone for a little while. That's why he's like, you got to go to the doctor while I'm away. And when he walks outside to get in his truck, he hears this weird noise, and he sees that a bird has flown into one of the windows. He leaves. 4 of the girls leave for school. April and Carolyn are home alone. April is by herself talking to nothing, and she's like, I miss Sadie, the dog. She was my best friend. Oh, you're my friend now. To nothing, just the air.
Sure.
Carolyn comes in and she's like, oh, who are you talking to? And the girl's like, I'm just talking to Rory, my new friend. And she's like, oh, that's great. Again, like in the Amityville Horror, like how similar are those two things? Even down to the 4-lettered name, Rory, Jody. So April says, do you want to see Rory? And the mom's like, sure. And she's like, okay, just look into this music box. When the music's over, you'll see him. And so the mom opens up the music box and she turns the key. And the inside of the music box is like a spiral. So when it turns, it's sort of like, it looks like it's off kilter because it has like a little, you know, like a little concentric circle sort of going like this. You know, when it rotates, it's like, kind of has like this weird effect. And there's a mechanism that raises this clown's head like in and out of the music box. So like it opens like a tent, and then this clown's like doo 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 doo, and just keeps like popping up as the music's playing, and it's like swirling, and the music's like going and going, and you're like waiting for something to appear, and then the little girl's like, gotcha, and she scares the mom.
Okay.
They're doing the fake scare, because later we're gonna see what's really in the mirror, but they do set it up because pretty well, because they make you wait like 30 seconds for the thing to finish, and you're like, just end already, I want to see what it is. But, you know, there's nothing there.
I'm very scared right now, actually. But I knew this one was going to be scary.
So after April scares Carolyn, she's like, I want to play hide and clap. And the mom's like, I don't want to. I'm really tired. I have all these stupid bruises all over my body. So finally the mom gives in, and she puts a blindfold on, and she spins around, and April runs out of the room, and she's like, okay, first clap. And then she hears like, and then she runs into like a side table, and then she runs into like the banister, and she's like, okay, second clap. And then she goes into the room with the wardrobe in it, and the wardrobe door opens on its own. She's like, okay, clap. And these like gnarly hands come out and spread the clothes.
Yikes.
And they go like,
Yikes.
And so she's like, I gotcha. And she walks up and she's like rummaging through the clothes and there's like nothing there. And then April pops out like in the doorway and she's like, I'm here. You weren't even close. And the mom takes off her blindfold and she's like looking through the clothes, like trying to figure out like who was making that clapping noise. We then see Roger on the phone. I guess it's hard times for the truck drivers because he's like, oh, that's like half my normal rate. And he's like, no, you know what? I'll do it. So they're like strapped for cash. I don't know what the trucking industry is doing in 1971, but he's got to take any job that he can. And so he's going to be gone for a week going to Florida. So he has to go from New Hampshire to Florida and back in 1 week. Later that night, Christine, who was the girl whose foot got dragged in the bed, the camera again slowly from the floor moving up towards her. You can just kind of hang over her. She gets dragged really hard, like almost off the bed. She wakes up and she hears this weird noise and she looks under the bed and they do that thing where you're under the bed and then you see like her head like peek down, but nothing happens yet. And then you get her point of view and she's looking under the bed.
I'm scared, babe.
Under the bed towards the open door of the bedroom. And the door slowly starts to close like...
Babes, I'm really scared. This is actually like connecting with me way more than any movie that we've seen, because this feels like very true to the ways that I actually scare the hell out of myself, like when I'm about to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Oh no.
Do you want me to keep going?
I'm scared. Yeah, I guess we have to.
Well, for all of our 7 listeners. So the door starts to close and she's like, Nancy, get up. And she wakes up and she's like, someone's standing behind the door, looking right at us. And Nancy gets up and she's like, there's nothing there. She's like waving her hands in the area and she's like sort of closed the door like halfway. So she's standing in the area where Christine thought she saw something. Then Christine says, it's standing right behind you. And then she goes to look over her shoulder and the door slams shut. And then you hear screaming and like we're in the parents' room. And you just hear the screaming and they're like, oh my God. And they get up and they run to the door and it's sort of locked at first. And like Roger like knocks it in and they go inside and Christine is on the bed just like freaked out. And she's like, it talked to me. It said it wants my family dead.
Oh my God.
And like the girl who was standing, Nancy, who was standing in the doorway, obviously didn't see anything. She's affected by the door closing very quickly, but she's so freaked out by her sister's reaction that she's just like completely pale. Then we cut back to the Warrens. This is a theme in the movie. Like we're cutting back and forth between this and you obviously know that they're going to connect. They try to prolong almost like when they're going to meet, but they should just meet already. By this point, it's already like a half hour more into the movie. Mm-hmm. They should already be meeting, you know, but like they sort of drag it out. So Ed is like, hey, I'm going to go run a few errands. And Lorraine's like, how long have you known me? You can't lie to me. I can see it in your face. And he's like, yeah, you got me. Father so-and-so wants me to check in on a new case. And she's like, I'm not letting you go alone to check out this new haunting.
That's so rude that he would want to go without her.
Well, because he's afraid that something... We'll get into what happened during the exorcism that's freaking him out. Like the last exorcism that they worked on.
Oh, yeah.
So he's worried that she's like about to lose her mind. And then they do this thing where she's like, do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?
Oh,
and he's like, can we do it again? And she's like, you're so silly. She's like, no, you said that God brought us together for a reason. And that kind of happens again. That comes up again later in the movie. And it's just so cheesy. Like, they're so unbelievable as a couple. Like, when he kisses her, or when she kisses him, he does this thing where he's like, he just kind of smiles. And he's like, nah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's real awkward. This part of the movie I actually like because they go to this house and they're upstairs in the attic with this couple. Is this what you heard? And then Ed like steps on the plank and it sounds like a ghost. And it goes like, and he's like, it's a rotted floorboard. There's a hole in this window. The breeze is coming in. It's rattling off these old pipes in the house. You're not haunted. There's nothing, haunting this house. And then he's like, usually there's a rational explanation for anything that you hear. And generally it's not an evil spirit, which I liked. It's, even though I think they're completely full of shit, the movie is sort of presenting two sides, that they're not saying that everything is a ghost, that they're using rational explanations and investigative tactics to sort of disprove, they're not just trying to take these people's money. Mm-hmm. Roger is away driving his truck. That night, Carolyn is looking in the mirror at all of like the bruises on her body. She then goes to fold some clothes before going to bed. She hears giggling and clapping, like the, and she's like, girls, it's like way too late for you to be playing. You guys need to go to bed. But she's like saying this. And like she doesn't see the kids, so she goes out in the hallway and she like opens the doors to the kids' rooms and they're all like asleep. And then all of a sudden in the hallway she hears all this glass shatter, and she looks out and all these family photos that had been lining the staircase just collapse one after the other. Then she hears more kids laughing from downstairs, and then all the clocks in the house start to chime.
Oh my God.
So the mom, Carolyn, goes downstairs and she hears two more claps, and she goes into the basement.
No.
She opens the door.
Why would you do that?
She opens the door, and she's kind of like looking, and the piano downstairs starts to play like this boom, 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 boom.
Oh my God.
She turns on the light.
No.
And like there's like a light at the top of the stairs, and then there's like a light switch to turn on the basement light. She turns on the basement light and she sees like a shadow, and she's like, whoever's down there, I'm locking you in. She goes to like rush out the door, but the door slams shut and hits her in the head, and she falls down the stairs and all the lights go out.
No.
Oh no, I'm sorry, the lights don't go out. She falls to the bottom, and then she sees a rubber ball just like bounce towards her, like somebody tossed it to her. She starts to run upstairs, and then the lights turn off. Like they literally like explode, like in Amityville Horror when the stupid asshole kid falls down the stairs. Yeah. So the lights go out, and she's at the top of the stairs, and she grabs the matchbox that Roger left before. Mm-hmm. She strikes a match, and she's like holding up to her face, and she hears a voice say, "Want to play hide and clap?" And then next to her, out of the shadows, come these two hands, and it goes, and then her matches go out, and then she just screams, and everything goes to black. Meanwhile, upstairs, Cindy, the girl who is sleepwalking again into the wardrobe, just like banging her head over and over again. The wardrobe is in Andrea's room. She was the girl who was standing on the stairs who told her dad, "Hey, Cindy's in my room." Andrea's like, "Hey, just come on, Cindy, you can sleep in here tonight." She puts her to bed, and then she hears the same banging sound on the wardrobe, even though Cindy's in the bed. Mm-hmm. And then they do this great thing where Cindy like rises up from the bed, and she kind of goes like, ah, and she's just raises like straight up. Andrea opens the wardrobe, and she's like looking through it, and there's nothing there. And then she turns back towards Cindy, and then Cindy's looking at something, and then Andrea turns, and the camera goes like real quick to the top of the wardrobe, and there's like this old decrepit woman, and she's like, "Nyah!" And then she jumps and she pounces on Nancy.
Creepy.
Mm-hmm. Of course, Roger is coming home from his trip as this is all going on.
How convenient.
And he hears the screaming from outside, and he runs in and he opens up the basement door and he rescues Carolyn, and then he goes into Andrea's room and sort of interrupts like her screaming.
Even though our dogs bark like too much,
mm-hmm.
that I should be paying attention to their warning barks more.
Yep. Well, I think if they won't walk in the room and they cry, I think that's a telltale
maybe
sign.
Don't go in.
Yep. Maybe just run away, and they live in another state.
A state of insanity.
So sometime later, we're at Massachusetts Western University. They're giving another talk, the Warrens. They're giving another lecture. And they're showing a film strip of this Frenchman who they were doing an exorcism on. They actually...
I think in French, they actually call it an exorcism. Actually, that's a terrible French accent.
We're from France.
They do this kind of interesting thing where they mention that the guy was molested and tortured by his father.
What guy?
The Frenchman who they're performing the exorcism on.
Okay.
And how like that sort of weakened him, for the devil to sort of take over him.
Jeez, victim blaming.
Yeah.
They are just going at it with that. Like, that's not his fault.
No,
Jeez.
well, I don't...
You're saying he's like weak and susceptible to this?
Well, I think the point is that like intense trauma, they're not saying like, oh, well, he was stupid because he was molested. I think they're basically saying like he was already weakened by these tragic events, and that was just like a perfect recipe. Like they're not trying to say like that was his fault, but they're just saying
like how real abuse happens to people that are susceptible to it.
Right. Like that. I always like to think of like these possessions as are they culminations of these horrible things that have happened in people's lives that sort of manifest in ways that we're unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
Like are these people, saying these things or like, talking in a different voice because they've reached a point where their mind is like sort of separating simply because they've just been traumatized so badly that they're trying to like physically leave their body in a way. And then we're just not understanding of how powerful the mind is in that respect. Mm-hmm. They don't delve too much into that.
That's a good question, though.
If you read my book below, there's more on that.
Oh, good.
We're viewing like a handheld 16mm camera, and we're viewing a film strip, so it's like real grainy, and they do a good job. It's like blurry, and the guy's like freaking out, and he's like speaking in tongues. he starts to like cry blood, like his tears are like all bloody, and then he lifts his shirt up and there's like an inverted cross that's like pressing through like his flesh. Like really cool effects. One of the students is like, well, like, you know, how do you help this guy? And Ed's like, well, we're not really authorized to perform exorcism. And then they don't say why. I wrote down here in big letters, why? They like, you know, we prepare very thoroughly. Yeah. and like they just never prepare you for that. Then they talk about the 3 stages of sort of a haunting / possession. The first stage is infestation, which is like whispering, a chair moves, you know, like you see a shadow or something like that. The next one is oppression, which is like psychologically and physically sort of breaking down the target of whoever the person, you know, the demon wants to inhabit. And then the final stage is like the possession, the actual like inhabitation. So Carolyn, as we see, has already gone through the first 2 stages, infestation and oppression. When they're getting in their car, Ed and Lorraine, Carolyn approaches them and she's like, I need your help. I heard that you investigate stuff. I want you to come to my house because we literally can't sleep. We're so scared of what's happening in our house. Ed is sort of like, no, we're not going to do that. But Lorraine is like shown to be the more caring one of the couple. But Ed just doesn't want to take the case because he thinks that Lorraine is something bad's going to happen to her. So Lorraine, being like very kind at heart's like, of course, you know, she sees that Carolyn is like completely just pale and just like out of her mind. And she's like, yes, of course, we'll help you. Ed and Lorraine go out to the house. They meet the family, and Carolyn's kind of talking through what's been happening. She mentions that like they smell like this old meat smell. And Ed is like, yeah, that's usually what happens with a demonic presence. There's some sort of like sulfur-like or rotting meat type smell. Roger mentions that they have to close this door that leads to like a parlor in the front entryway because if they don't lock it, then there's like 3 knocks like over and over again. And Ed's like, oh, that's like mocking the Trinity, like these 3 knocks. Roger tells them about the wardrobe that's in Nancy's room, or Andrea's room rather. And he's like, oh, it was here when we bought the place.
I was just going to ask you, like, is that theirs or
no,
was it there?
It is not. Of course it's not theirs.
Sure. Oh, and this house also comes with a haunted wardrobe.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys wanted that, but we've got it.
In a second, I'll explain to you how they bought the house. Because you're probably wondering, how can they buy this 14-room farmhouse on a trucker's salary in 1971?
It's still a mystery.
Lorraine is like, I can commune with the dead. And I can immediately feel that something awful has happened here. Ed asks the stupid question where he's like, so why not move? Just move out of here. And Roger's like, that's really complicated. We just bought this house on auction. We didn't even see it before we bought it. We have too much money tied up in here. I'm a freaking trucker.
Mercy sakes, you put about 8.5 on me. Blowing the windows down. Bring it on.
Where else are we going to go? You can't get like a hotel for like 7 people. That's not cheap. And I'm kind of like, yeah, Ed, why did you ask that stupid question? You've done enough investigations to know you just don't move.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
I mean, it's just an insensitive kind of rude question.
Yeah, Ed's kind of an asshole in this movie.
Yeah.
Ed and Roger and Carolyn are in the kitchen, and Ed is recording them on a little cassette player. And he's like, okay, tell me everything since the first occurrence. Tell me everything that's happened. Meanwhile, Lorraine is talking to April in her room about Rory. April's like, you use this little music box and you can see Rory. And then she's like, okay. So she twists it and it gets like, and it's like spinning and spinning.
Yeah.
And when it makes a revolution, she sees behind her this boy just standing behind her, and then like it disappears. It's not a jump scare. It's not like, it's just like there, and then he disappears. He looks almost exactly like the kid in Suspiria, who looks like kind of like Augustus Gloop.
Because that pipe doesn't go to the marshmallow room, it goes to the fudge room.
He's wearing like, you know, like lederhosen and like a, you know, like a gray jacket, and he has like the little black tie that sort of droops down. He looks exactly like that kid from Suspiria, and I was like, oh my god, I wonder if that's like a little homage to it. Lorraine then goes out to the dock. I don't know if you remember from the beginning of the movie that there's a tree like on the dock, and then there's like a lake. Ed walks up to her and he's like, what's going on? And Lorraine hears like this creaking sound, and she slowly turns around, and Ed can't see it, but behind him there's like feet, like dirty feet just swinging with
in the tree.
Yeah, so somebody's hung themselves.
Yeah.
The woman's wearing like kind of like a white nightgown. It's all like stained and stuff like that, and just keeps like creaking and turning back. And he's like, what's going on? And she's like, yeah. She's like looking up at it. They go back inside, and now they're sort of talking with Roger and Carolyn about like how they feel they should move along with the investigation. Ed recommends a cleansing of the home. Lorraine says that she saw this entity, and then we do kind of like this black and white footage of like remembering when they first entered the house. And you see that Carolyn has like this black smog, like that's kind of flowing around her. Mm-hmm. And Lorraine's like, as soon as I walked in the house, I saw it attached to you. And I saw it attached to one of your daughters. And like it shows them meeting the daughters, and like there's this black kind of cloud, like, you know, swirling like behind them. Roger's like, well, can we like, just like, what if we just leave though? Like, will the spirit actually, you know, like go away? Like, is actually moving like the best option? And Ed's like, no, like having a ghost in your house is like stepping on gum. It just kind of like follows you everywhere.
You got any gum?
And I'm like, have you ever stepped on gum before? First thing you do is you peel it off and you get rid of it.
Unless you don't know.
That's true. But you always feel like the squishy, like, you're always like, I can't walk right. There must be gum on my feet.
Yeah.
So Ed's like, before we can do an actual exorcism, we have to gather evidence. And then we have to convince a priest to go to the Vatican to approve the exorcism.
Nothing like a little jaunt to Italy.
Right? Later that night at the Warrens' home, their daughter Judy gives Lorraine a locket that she got with her grandmother at the churchyard sale. She got two, actually. In one locket, Judy puts her own face, and in the other locket, she puts Ed and Lorraine. Judy tells her mom, like, I miss you. So it's kind of hinting at that they're gallivanting off everywhere doing their ghost hunting thing, and they have very little time for their child. Mm-hmm. Ed then comes into the room, and he's like, all the stuff that we recorded today at the Perron's house, Carolyn's voice isn't on any of the tape. So he plays it back, and you hear Ed talking, and then he's like turning it over to Lorraine, or turning it over to Carolyn, and there's nothing. It's just completely blank. So her voice didn't get picked up. Lorraine tells Ed that she did some research, and that the person who built the house was Judson Sherman in 1863. He was married to this woman named Bathsheba. She was related to this woman named Mary Town Esty, who was accused of witchcraft.
How are they related?
Like distant,
okay,
distant relatives. Because the Salem witch trials was in the 1600s. The house was built in 1863 or around that time. Mm-hmm. Judson Sherman's wife, Bathsheba, she was the one related to the witch. Bathsheba had a baby, and
wait, her name is Beth?
Bath. B-A-T-H.
Bathsheba.
Yeah, B-A-T-H-S-H-E-B-A.
Got it.
Bathsheba had a baby. 7 days after the baby was born, the husband walks into the room and finds her sacrificing the baby in front of their fireplace. Mm-hmm. She runs outside, throws a noose around her neck, climbs a tree, that tree in the back, wraps her noose around her neck. I proclaim myself to Satan, and that she cursed anyone who claimed her land, and then she hung herself. And the time of death...
307.
Bingo. Kind of weird plot hole if the husband looked at his watch at that time, because I don't think forensics could have proved that she died at 307 in 1863.
A.M.?
Yeah. Another woman, who they don't say her first name, but her last name is Walker, she lived with her son, Rory, in the house later on. Rory went missing in the woods behind the house. She... the mother Walker killed herself by hanging herself in the cellar.
So this is a real American Horror Story death house situation. That's what they call the first episode, Death House?
Murder house.
Murder house. I'm just laughing at being a self-proclaimed Satanist. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, your name's Bathsheba. You have 8 children. You live on a farm in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's listening to you. You're like, ugh, I'm a Satanist. Jesus.
You're like, well, you know, I have a knitting circle. Love to read, self-proclaimed Satanist. I like to cook.
I felt it more like a sarcastic offhand comment that like an overworked farm wife would say, like, "Ugh, leave me alone. I'm a Satanist. I have Satan things to do.
I can't work. Today's a holiday."
Today is a holiday for Satanists.
In real life, Bathsheba was actually Baptist, which is kind of interesting because the devil that we deal with in this movie and like in Amityville Horror is a very Catholic devil.
Yeah.
And with a very Catholic resolution.
Yeah.
You know, prayer and sort of that stuff. Lorraine has discovered that the land that the house used to be on actually used to encompass like the whole like lake, everything around it. But the house that they have now just has like this little patch. And it was subdivided into just different, you know, pieces of land that were then sold off.
Right.
A boy drowned in the lake.
But I think, to be fair, that any lake in the world, somebody probably drowned in.
Oh, absolutely. I think they're just saying that, like, there's, like, a lot of weird deaths going on in this general vicinity.
Okay.
Including the death of this boy who drowned. And then a maid who worked at another house committed suicide by slitting her wrist. The tape of the Perron family that they had recorded earlier then starts to play on its own. And you hear Ed's voice, and then instead of Carolyn, you hear like and all
Oh
these
my
kind
God,
of like
that's horrible.
demonic sounds. And they look,
Babe, that was such a horrifying noise you just made. Truly terrible.
they look to their right, and they have a little clock on the table. Guess what time it is?
307.
Bingo. So the spirit is sort of detaching in a way from the house and sort of following the Warrens back, which I think is kind of an interesting twist. They kind of do that in Amityville Horror a little bit. Like, you know, the priest gets blinded at the church. Like the house it seems to have further reach beyond just the house. Mm-hmm. We're then introduced to this guy named Brad, and he's a police officer, and he's been employed by the Warrens to help with their investigation of the house. They have another guy named Drew, who's like kind of out of place because he's the only, other than the reporter who's African American, Drew is the only other like ethnic person of color. Mm-hmm. He's Asian, and I think he's supposed to be a little bit of a stand-in for the director, who's also Asian.
Okay.
Because he kind of looks like him, and he's like very kind of boyish, and I think that's like, you know, kind of like an M. Night Shyamalan. Instead of sticking himself in the movie, he sort of, you know, brings himself in that way. So Brad is the cop, and Drew is the assistant. This part of the movie I actually love because they bring in all this cool equipment to like catch the ghosts. So they set up like cameras, and they set up
That's pretty funny.
like little temperature gauges, so that if the temperature drops, it automatically takes a picture. And then they have like a UV light to like see where the ghost might have walked, and they have like put bells on other doors so they know like when things are moving throughout the house. It's a really cool, like, kind of, you know, the way we think of like the crappy ghost hunters now, like on Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah.
They set up all their equipment. This is like the lo-fi version of that. I don't know if this is true that the Warrens did all of this, but it's just like a kind of a cool 70s. They have all these cool old cameras and, you know, all these old like microphones, and they rig all the rooms, and they run all these wires down so they can listen to each room at the same time just by kind of twisting this knob and changing the channels.
Cool.
Lorraine and Carolyn have this conversation where Carolyn's like, we can't hang up any of the photos in the house because they just keep getting knocked down by the ghost. And she shows her this particular one where it's just the whole family, and it's like this blue sky, and Lorraine touches Carolyn as she's touching the photo, and Lorraine like sees the memory of that photo. Mm-hmm. And they're like at the beach, and like they took it while they were driving up the coast to get to wherever this house is, and they're like, we just stopped because it was so nice, and we all thought that this was going to be like a new start to our life, and it's just, you know, like priming the audience to be like, this is the last happy moment, and then everything scary happened, so that they can go back to this moment later in the movie to remember sort of what it was like to be, you know, happy.
Yeah.
As a family. But it's like this crappy like clairvoyant effect, like she touches her, and then she's like, and then she can see, like, you know, her memory.
Yeah.
And Lorraine's like, you were so happy. And Karen's like, yeah, now we have a fucking ghost in our house.
Actually, you're in the ghost's house, if you want to get technical.
That's true. The auction was like, how much for the ghost house? $1. I have $1 here. $1.
I have a buck. I have $1 there. $1, do I do two? Sold for a buck.
They're like, oh my God, I can't believe we got this amazing deal. $1 for a whole house.
$1.73. Can't believe it.
Amazing. Yeah. It's like people that get a great deal at auction and then can't stop talking about their great deal that they got at an auction.
Yep.
They're like, oh my God, we got this amazing deal. $1.73 for a whole house.
For a whole house.
Can you believe it?
We get to stay in the house.
Can you believe it? It's ours. We got it for less than $2.
The auctioneer was like, enjoy your murder house. What? Enjoy your house.
I mean, your regular house.
Your regular old house.
Your normal house.
They then set up this like weird romantic subplot between Drew, the Asian assistant, and the oldest daughter of the family. And
okay.
Yeah, and like he's showing her how the black light works. He's like, okay, press your hand on the table and then take it off. And then he shines the black light over it, and he can see like the residual handprint that she's left. So he's like, you know, it tracks like the heat that's kind of left behind. Mm-hmm. And that kind of technique will come into play later in the movie, but they're just showing the audience like how this works. But it's kind of like a weird flirty, and he's like, it's pretty far out, and she's like, yeah, it's really groovy. But like in all seriousness, like Scooby-Doo is gonna walk in.
I'm Gumby, damn it!
And you know,
Your
Shaggy's
face when you said that is so funny. You're like,
like you're
come on.
because like something cheesy hasn't happened in a while, so you're like, oh, I'm getting into this movie, and then you're like, ugh,
Yeah.
come on. Oh, and then we get like another false scare where like this door opens and it's like, and it's just Brad, the stupid cop, who's like in the bathroom. He's like farting and washing his hands.
Sure.
And he's like, I was just going to the bathroom. And you're like, well, it's like you're trying to scare us. They're listening on their headphones to all the noises coming from the rooms, and it's just like this shh, because the sound is turned up so loud to hear even like the tiniest whisper, but they don't really hear anything. They're going from room to room, and it's all shh. Ed sets these crucifixes up around the house, concentrate the spirit in one direction. Like he thinks like if the crucifix is in this room, it won't go near it. They then hear one of the bells that they've attached to one of the doors go off. A door opens and then a camera flashes. And it's the basement door that opens. So they're like, oh, some sort of spirit went through there. So then we get to my favorite part of the movie, film the whole scene in 16 millimeter. And it's got this light on it. So it's the single light is lighting the basement as they go in. And it looks like, like Blair Witch Project. And Ed has a microphone and like a little recording device. And Lorraine is with him. And then Brad, the cop, he's operating the camera. They all go downstairs. And it's like this really creepy, just, single light source flashlight just flashing around the room. And, Ed is like too bright because the light is not, filtered or anything. It's like this harsh light on him. It just looks really realistic. And it's just a really cool effect. And you're like, oh, God, you're like right in, you hear the sound of the movie of the 16 millimeter camera. It's like, shh, and all this stuff is like kind of coming together. And you really feel like you're watching this documentary footage like that. It's real. Ed is like, hey, come out, do something, push something over. And he puts the microphone to like a copper pipe and he hears like water rushing. And then he puts it to like the furnace and he hears like these kind of creepy noises trying to like disprove like where the noises were coming from. Lorraine is like kind of bent over and she's like, something's here. I can feel it. And her hands like, she's like, my hands are really, really cold. Ed's like, move something, just do something, show us you're here. And then nothing happens. So they start to walk upstairs and then they hear like a boom, and they all turn around and they look downstairs and then there's nothing. And then they walk outside into the hallway and the door slams shut. The next morning, everybody has like slept over. Everybody's sleeping in the house, including Ed and Lorraine Warren. And they're all like, at breakfast and they're just like really loud and, they're making pancakes and the mom's like, wow, I can't believe there's so much energy in the room. It's so nice to have everybody here. We haven't been this happy in like so long. Carolyn's like, I really need some rest. Like I feel like I haven't slept in forever. And then Ed and Lorraine are like, we'll watch the kids and you go sleep, but we have to do our investigation anyway. We'll watch everybody. And then Roger's, going to go to work. So we're going to take a quick break from our synopsis of The Conjuring and we're going to play a little game. This is sort of something that we wanted to do from the beginning, but we just hadn't had the opportunity. And I thought this was great with these two back-to-back movies because the game we're going to be playing is called Based on a True Story.
Okay.
The objective is I have a list of 20 movies and you have to tell me whether or not the movie claims that it is based on a true story. The first one is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
True story.
Bingo, true story. Number 2, The Hills Have Eyes.
True story.
True story. The Wicker Man.
True story. I think it's based on something that happened in the news that ended up being like disproven, but I think it's based on true events.
No, incorrect.
Oh.
Jaws.
True.
True story. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Well, it's clearly not true, but I wonder if somebody made a claim that it happened to them. Let's say not true.
Not true. That is correct. Halloween.
H2O.
With underwater the whole movie.
Not true.
Not true. That is correct. Psycho.
True?
That is true. It's based in part on Ed Gein.
Oh, right. Yeah, I knew that.
The Shining.
Not true.
True. The book and the movie are based on actual claims that people have experienced in the Stanley Hotel.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And also based on Stephen King's experience in the hotel when he stayed there.
Huh.
Poltergeist.
True.
That is true. The Blob.
It's gotta be fake.
No, that's true. It's based on these Philadelphia police officers in 1950 who saw this gelatinous blob fall from the sky and disappear before it hit the earth. And that was the inspiration for the Blob. Silence of the Lambs.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. It's a composite of a bunch of different serial killers.
Yeah.
Again, Ed Gein, Buffalo Bill.
That skin wearing thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sixth Sense.
Not true.
That's correct. The Omen.
I feel like maybe true. Yeah, I'm gonna say true.
No, that is false. It is based on the Bible, but it's not based on any like one particular story.
The
that actually
Bible's
happened.
true, babe.
Saw.
Not true.
That is correct. Rosemary's Baby.
True.
No, not true.
Not true.
Not true.
When I said true, I meant not true.
Dawn of the Dead.
Not true.
That is correct. The Fly.
Not true.
Correct. Nightmare on Elm Street.
True?
That is true. It's based on, I believe it's Filipino men who had dreams that were so terrifying that they died in their sleep.
Oh,
And that's what gave
wow.
Wes Craven the inspiration for it. The Exorcist.
True.
That is true. Okay, so our final clue, Evil Dead.
I feel like this is a trick question. I'm going to say not true.
That is correct.
Okay.
You got 15 out of 20.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding. And you haven't even seen half of these movies.
Most of them.
Well, that was like a fun little interlude.
Some say it was fun.
Yeah, well.
I'm just kidding. It was fun.
But I bet you learned a lot about what constitutes a true story.
I sure did.
Meanwhile.
Lorraine is outside tending to some laundry that's like on a clothesline. This like storm comes in real fast and it blows one of the sheets against like an invisible figure. So it looks like a person. Mm-hmm. So like it snaps off the clothesline and you kind of see this outline. And then it blows onto the window upstairs. And then as it kind of slinks away, Lorraine sees like a figure in the window, and that's Carolyn's room. And then the figure just like looks at her and just like turns to the side. Inside, Carolyn is sleeping. She like wakes up, like her body's contorting, and she starts to like just like scream in this kind of demonic voice. And she turns her head, and then she sees like hair, and then like this face turns towards her, and it's like above her, and it's the same kind of creepy woman that the kids saw on top of the wardrobe that attacked them in that one scene. And the spirit vomits blood into Carolyn's mouth.
Oh, boy. What a wake up.
Yeah.
Best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup.
Good morning.
Please don't ever wake me up like that.
It's a Bloody Mary.
Oh. Good one. Good one.
Lorraine runs into the room because she's seen like the spirit in the window. So she knows what's happening because she's obviously clairvoyant. When she runs into the room, Carolyn is in the bathroom, and she comes out and she's just like wiping her mouth, and she's like, oh, you know, like I just feel sick. But Lorraine's like, no, I saw like something weird. Something is going on.
Wait, was the blood like real blood though?
No, it was like in her mind, because it cuts from like her vomiting into her mouth, and then like what's really going on in the bedroom is she's just like contorting her chest like upward as like this is happening. So this is sort of like in like the spectral ghost realm that it's happening.
Yeah. It reminds me of like, you know, in Adobe where you have different layers.
Yeah.
Like that.
Somebody just hit it in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Got it.
Found it.
Yeah. Went to file ghost show. While this is all going on, Roger and Ed are working on Roger's old Chevy, kind of like an old carport, like a wooden carport. And I wrote down in parentheses, men! Exclamation point, because it's a very manly scene. This very manly scene is going on where they're getting their, you know, all greasy, and they're putting a lot of elbow grease into their lug nuts and their lube jobs.
Oh boy.
Ed confesses to Roger that he didn't want to take the case very bluntly. He's like, I didn't want to take this stupid case. And Roger's like, oh yeah, thanks for helping me, you dick.
Thanks for letting me hire you though.
Yeah. Ed's like, you know, we did this French exorcism that we saw earlier in the movie. Mm-hmm. Lorraine saw something. So this is like, again, this traumatic event has been brought up, and we see what happens in that during that exorcism to sort of freak her out. And the French guy grabs her and just stares into her eyes, and she just like screams like she's witnessing like the most horrific things. Like she's seeing like what hell really looks like, or she's just seeing like this horrible vision. But after that, it's revealed that she went home after the exorcism and just locked herself in her room for like a whole week. And she didn't come out, and nobody knew what was going on.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
What a diva.
Ed says that like every time they do like an exorcism, it takes a piece of Lorraine, and he's just worried that is the next piece going to be the last piece. Later that night, Brad, who is, if you remember, the police officer, and Drew, who's the assistant to Ed and Lorraine, are taking shifts, like staying up and listening to like the audio in the room and just like waiting for the cameras to go off in the house. Brad leaves to get a refill of coffee, and he goes into the kitchen and he hears a wind chime outside, and he kind of sees like a shadow. He walks outside and he investigates like the back porch, and there's nobody there. He then hears somebody say, "Look what she made me do." And he comes inside, and he turns to his left, and there's kind of like a little, you could call it like a mud room, or, you know, like an area where you would come in and like you'd either put laundry or like, dirty shoes or something like that after, like being outside. He sees a maid there, like a kind of dressed like an old kind of like French maid outfit. And she's like, her wrists are turned towards him. And
Old dead maids are my favorite trope.
Are they?
Like in haunted houses where you're like, I didn't hire a maid. And then they're like in old-timey clothes and you're like, I didn't hire an old maid in old-timey clothes. That's weird. Where did that come from? I mean, clearly it's a ghost from the past, obviously. But
Right. Or maybe he has a fetish. Maybe he has a French maid fetish.
Well, just like for a second when you're watching, you're like, oh, okay, he has a French maid fetish. And then you're like, nope, that's a ghost.
Nope, that's a ghost. Well, this one also turns out to be a ghost because she turns her wrists towards him and they're slit. She turns away from him and walks behind like some laundry that's kind of been hung in the room. And he's like, hey, wait a second. And he goes into the room and he turns around and like there's nobody there. And he starts to walk out and then they do this jump scare where she just screams, look what she made me do. And it cuts to her like running forward and she tackles him and knocks him down. And he gets tangled in like these sheets, almost like he's fighting like this fake ghost. And obviously he's screaming his head off. So everybody runs in. And they're like, what's going on? And he's like, I saw a woman. And then in the hallway, while everybody's kind of attending to Brad the cop, she walks across the hallway, like in the background. And all the cameras start going off that they've rigged up. So like these flashes go off like sequentially as she's walking past. Lorraine says that she's not the one who set off the cameras because the cameras are only set to go off when there's like a temperature spike. They have these little sensors on them that measures the air around them. So she's suggesting that a ghost is like following her as she's like sleepwalking upstairs. She goes into her room. She goes into the room with the wardrobe, and she closes the door. And that guy Drew says that he can hear another voice in the room with her.
Scary.
So everybody like goes upstairs, and they're trying to get into the room, and it's at first it's locked, and then because they're strong men, they break in, and there's nobody in the room.
Not even the girl?
No, it's completely empty. The room is like lit in this sort of not pastel, but very kind of like light blue. And then they do that thing where like you can see their breath because like the room is so cold. Ed requests the UV light that they were going over before, like where they can see the handprints. So he shines the light in the room and he sees kind of like footprints going toward the wardrobe. Handprints on the wardrobe. He opens it up and he rips all the clothes out and he shines the light on the back of the wardrobe and there's handprints all along the back wall. And then he takes his hands and he actually slides the wardrobe panel back in the back, and it reveals that there's a hole in the wall. And you go into the wall, and then you're like inside the framing of the house. And inside is Cindy. She's in this little kind of cubby, and she's just like shivering there. So they kind of rescue her and they bring her out. They see that inside this crawl space are a bunch of toys. So Lorraine goes in there. There's a little shelf that has a few toys, and then it has, I can't remember if it's octagonal or hexagonal kind of shape where something used to be. Like there's no dust there. And it turns out it's that music box that they had before that where she could see the little boy, Rory, when she played it. Everything sort of has to be perfect for a soul to cross over. So she puts the music box back in its place. And she sees a crusty old rope kind of like snaking over this little shelf. And she starts to pull and it's revealed that there's kind of a shaft that goes to the whole house that's like behind this crawl space.
Like a dumbwaiter?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So she's pulling the rope up and up and up, and she finally gets to the end. It's a noose, and it's the noose that the Bathsheba used to kill herself on the tree outside. While they're in this space, April says that space is where Rory hides when he's afraid. While Lorraine is in the crawl space, the floor gives way, and she falls completely through the entire house and into the basement.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was going to happen, to be honest.
They do have a really cool effect when she falls, like the way they film it. It really looks like she's like the little drywall flakes are like following her, and there's like a bunch of plaster and stuff.
How big is this crawl space?
It's really big. It's enough for her to stand up in, but it's thin, like between the studs of a wall.
Right.
But it's enough for her to like stand up in.
Interesting.
When she falls into the basement, she hears a woman crying, and she opens up the music box because everything fell with her. So she opens up the music box. And she sees behind her that there's like this kind of heavy-set woman, like crouched or curled over something, like she's holding something and she's crying. The woman starts to turn, like in the mirror, she's turning towards Lorraine. And Lorraine turns back to look at her, but there's nobody there. And then when she turns forward, the woman is there staring at her. And it looks like she has no eyes, like it's all black, but it's like her makeup had run because she was crying. So it creates like these little tentacles on her face, but you can actually kind of see her eyes. She's like, look what she made me do. meaning Bathsheba, killing her little kid Rory. This woman Walker, then disappears, and then you hear kind of like this creaking rope sound, and she picks up a flashlight that she had in the crawl space, and she kind of shines it across the basement, and then like these feet like swoop in, and it's the hanging body of Bathsheba. So then we get a view of Bathsheba's face. Even though she's like hung, she's obviously a ghost. Like she starts screaming at Lorraine, and Lorraine tries to run out of the basement, but she gets caught by the locket that her daughter gave her, that has Judy's picture in it, and she just tears it so forcefully that it just snaps. By confirming that the Walker woman was like, look what she made me do. She runs out of the basement and she's like all frantic, and she's like, I know what's going on. I know that Bathsheba is possessing whoever lives in this house to kill their child as like a sacrifice. Because Bathsheba was a noted Satanist. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Where Carolyn is being affected by Bathsheba, and she says that the bruises on her body are like her feeding, the ghost feeding off of her, off of her energy. And if you remember, there's like 3 parts to like the possession. There's like 3 stages to the possession. So like the second part was oppression, and that was like the physical, mental sort of aspect of it. And then the possession is when they're weak enough that they can take over. The ghost can take over. While she's explaining all this, all the crucifixes in the house start to wobble, and like they kind of magnetize upright, and then they all fall like directly onto the floor. Like the ghost is now kind of toying with everybody in the house. Nancy, one of the daughters, her hair, like the front of her hair starts to stand on end, like up in the air. And one of the other sisters is like, your hair. And as soon as she looks up, she gets thrown into like a glass partition. Something is dragging her across the room by her hair. So she's like flying across the room, banging into stuff. Like 2 guys try to grab her, and they're being dragged along with her. So like this, this ghost is like super powerful that she's just dragging this girl everywhere. One thing that I don't like about this movie is that, so we have all this dramatic, scary tension, like this girl is being dragged around, and then it just ends, and then we go to another scene. There's no sort of resolution. You would think like, as a ghost, you do this thing and then you just leave. Like, why wouldn't you continue, or why wouldn't they be like, okay, we got to get out of the house now? Like, tell the audience what the characters are gonna do.
I am confused about why they aren't leaving the house.
Okay, well, that's gonna actually come into play in a few minutes. So the first reason that we're given was earlier in the movie where they can't afford it. They can't afford it. So they have that sort of logic set up, but there's going to be a different reason in a second why they can't leave the house.
Because they said they wouldn't.
Because they said they loved it. Ed, Lorraine, Brad, and Drew are leaving the house, and Ed is telling Roger, we're going to develop the film. We're going to take it to a priest. I'll be back.
Death is but a door. Time is but a window. I'll be back.
But Lorraine won't. Lorraine, meanwhile, is standing on the dock in the backyard. She looks down in the water, and she sees her daughter, Judy, floating by underwater wearing the locket, like looking dead. She's like yellow and pale. So she's like, this is an omen. This is like a premonition. Like the ghost is telling me something about Judy. Lorraine runs inside the house, and she grabs the phone and she calls her house, and she gets her mom, Georgiana, and she's like, is Judy okay? Where's Judy? And the mom's like, she's fine. He's like, no, you have to check on her. You have to make sure that she's okay. So the grandma checks on the girl, and she's fine. And she's like, okay, that's great, but we have to get home now because I saw her in the water, and something bad is about to happen. The Perone family spends the night in a hotel.
And we'll leave the light on for you.
It seems weird because do you think they can just leave the house? The mom, though, is like glass-eyed. She's like completely out of it. She like won't even get out of the car really when they get to the hotel. So kind of something's going on. The Warrens go to a priest then to show the priest the footage they've developed of everything that they shot in the house. Then they show him like Nancy being dragged around by her hair, and the priest is like, this is amazing footage. Like there's just a few problems. None of the kids are baptized, and the family's not religious. They're not Catholics.
So I'm afraid I can't do anything here.
Yeah, so he's like, hard, fast rules. I can't do anything about that.
But we'll certainly read any other scripts you send us your way.
Right.
You send our way.
Gave him the old D-girl brush off.
Yeah.
Ed's like, you gotta be shitting me.
Don't bullshit me.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
Do you not see what we're giving you? Like, how could you just turn a blind eye? So the priest is like, okay, I'll push it through to the Vatican myself. And I wrote a note down like, this is 1971. this is not a text message that you send to the Pope
Yeah.
and go, hey, Pope, see the attached screenshot. What do you think? This like takes so much time. And there's like a really stupid line later in the movie about his interaction with the Vatican.
Calls him on his Pope phone.
Yeah, like there's like a phone that looks like John Paul II, and you take his head off. And
Oh, boy.
Or he shines like a light like Batman. It's like the Pope hat.
Yeah.
And then the Pope comes in with his Pope mobile. The priest is going to push it through, and then he's like, okay, see ya. And he kicks the Warrens out. So they're heading home, and a storm comes through, and it starts to rain. And at their house, Judy is trying to sleep, and the locket that has her parents' picture on it is kind of hanging loosely from a lamp next to her bed, and it starts to spin on its own, like very rapidly back and forth. And she walks down the hall, and she's like, Mom, Dad? And she doesn't realize that they're not home yet. This is like a really great 70s house, like a lot of floral wallpaper. And I just made note of that, like lots of carpeting and like wood paneling and stuff like that. It's like a real classic 70s house. I think they did a good job with that, making them seem as if they were a regular family. Because they could have made their house like look creepy. Like they're very Addams Family like, because they hunt ghosts and they live in a creepy house, but they have like a area outside where they have chickens. And they have like a little garden and stuff like that. They did a good job kind of dismantling the, like this stigma that you would think that they would have to live in like a creepy home or something like that. Judy goes into the relic room where they have all their creepy artifacts.
I knew she was going to go in there.
And Annabelle is gone from the case.
Where did Annabelle go?
She hears this kind of like animalistic growling, and she runs into a room and she closes the door. She hears loud banging on the door, like the spirit is sort of coming for her. The lights in the room then go out, and we kind of get like lightning and thunder. She hears a rocking chair creaking.
It's Annabelle.
Behind her. And it's not just Annabelle. It's a decrepit old woman facing away from her, brushing Annabelle's hair.
Oh, God.
And Judy turns towards the rocking chair, and then the old woman doesn't turn, but Annabelle's face turns towards her. Like slowly, it goes like slowly, like just looks at her.
None of this is Judy's fault.
No, Judy's innocent in all of this. She was just curious. So Judy starts to scream, and now her grandmother wakes up. Instead of like she didn't hear her going like Mom, Dad, like over and over again.
Shut up, you old pig!
So the grandmother wakes
she
up.
She probably hears that every night. She tuned it out.
Yeah, that's true. She's a stupid kid. I hate watching this kid. The rocking chair that Annabelle and this creepy old woman were in is now empty. Ed and Lorraine arrive home now, and Lorraine is like freaking out in the car because she, as a clairvoyant, she can sense that something is happening to Judy, that like some presence is there. Mm-hmm. They burst into the house. The grandmother is trying to get the door open to the room that Judy is in. Ed like kicks it in, and he grabs Judy, and as he does, the rocking chair like flies towards them, and it crashes into the wall and explodes into like 1,000 pieces. Judy says that Annabelle is the one who did it, and Ed's like, okay, let me go check. So he goes into the relic room, and Annabelle is still like neatly in her cage, and he's like, nope, she's still there, nothing's wrong. While this is going on, Roger arrives to the hotel after going out to like run some errands. One of his daughters runs out, and she's like, Mom took April and Christine in the other car, and she's taking them back to the house. And then one of my favorite lines, they're like, she took her back to the house, and she smelled like rotten meat. So the audience now knows that she's doubly possessed, and that she's taking these kids back for some reason to the house to sacrifice them
for steak dinner.
Roger calls Ed and Lorraine, and they zip over there real quick.
They're like, you gotta come back again.
Yeah, they're like, ugh.
I know you just got home to your own daughter that might be possessed.
Right. They go to they all rush back to the house. The door's locked, so Brad, the cop, he's like, I'll take care of this, and he brings a shotgun from his cruiser and he blows the door open.
Seems excessive.
Yeah, it does. But the shotgun is going to come into play in a few minutes.
Of course.
In the basement, Carolyn is trying to stab Christine with a pair of scissors. I guess you would call them more like shears than scissors. Drew, the Asian assistant guy, he runs up to her and he's like pulling the scissors back, like trying to like prevent her from stabbing Christine. Ed and Lorraine and Brad and Roger intervene and like successfully get Christine out of there and prevent Carolyn from stabbing her. Brad leaves his shotgun against the piano, which is at the base of the stairs to the basement. Drew brings Christine to one of the cars outside, and he locks her in there. He says, like, stay in there, don't come in the house. They try to bring Carolyn outside the house, but as soon as she steps through the threshold of the front door, all of her skin starts to burn. So like the ghost is trying to keep her trapped in the house, and if they let her leave, if they try to bring her out, she'll die. So now this is like the first full possession. Like before, the ghost was like attached to her, but it wasn't fully possessing her. It was trying to get her alone with the kids, and this is like the first chance it has to do that. So now she's fully possessed, and she can't leave the house or else she'll die. Because her skin is burning, they sort of like push back into the house a little bit, and then something grabs Carolyn and knocks her to the floor and drags her into the basement. And they do kind of that thing where like her fingers are on like the door frame, and then she like peels back, and then she shoots out a frame, and she's like screaming for help like in her own voice, but you can sort of hear it start to like turn into like this sort of demonic undertone. Drew tries to look for April because she's the only one unaccounted for. So he's like, I'm going to look for April, and then everybody else is going to go into the basement to deal.
April's the sleepwalking one?
April's the littlest girl, the one who talks to Rory.
Oh, yeah.
Cindy is the sleepwalking one.
Oh, yeah.
Carolyn has like superhuman strength at this point. She's just knocking everybody aside no matter how much they're trying to like pin her down. She tears a chunk of Brad's face off with her teeth. Like he leans in too close and she bites him and just peels like his cheek off.
Jesus.
And then sort of while everybody's like kind of concerned with that, Roger takes a big bed sheet and wraps it over Carolyn. And then they kind of subdue her like that, and they handcuff her to a chair in the middle of the basement. They decide that Ed has to do the exorcism because they can't wait for the priest. They can't wait for the stupid Vatican approval because who knows how long that's going to take.
2 weeks by steamship.
But probably even more because they have to send the footage first to the Pope.
Right.
You know, like, and it's in the 70s. Forget about it. Ed wants Lorraine to leave because he thinks that, you know, if she gets involved that she's going to die or whatever. And then she repeats, Lorraine repeats this line from earlier in the movie where she's like, God brought us together for a reason. This is the reason. And you're kind of like, ugh, gross. It's so like forced, especially because Patrick Wilson, like we talked about, has like absolutely no chemistry with Vera Farmiga, and
with like anyone.
Yeah, he's like, he kisses her like with his teeth. She like puckers her lips and he just presses his teeth to her lips, like he doesn't want to close his lips.
Babe, is that not how you kiss?
Okay.
I've been kissing you like this for so long.
I kiss like this. It's very loud and uncomfortable in public.
It sounds like teeth knocking together because that's what it is.
It sounds like marbles in a bag. So Ed grabs a Bible. He is about to completely sound like an idiot while he's trying to read Latin. He you know, like if you're trying to like sort of be cool, you put on like a little bit of an accent, like where you're trying to read it so you sound like official, and he's just like a Jesus, a and it's like this really like nasally whiny like reading of this like Latin.
He was just literally imitating his Latin teacher from middle school.
Yeah, he's like in nomine Patris God, and you're like, all right.
Okay.
It would have been nice if they had given Patrick Wilson like a little bit of a Latin lesson or something to make it feel like he knows what these words mean,
right,
so that he can emphasize what he's supposed to emphasize. Because the prayer, you know, is supposed to be like God commands you to go back to where you came from, and it's supposed to be you're more intimidating the devil or the spirit rather than like the actual words. And it just feels like so hollow that he's sort of saying it. So Ed is reciting Latin like a ninth grade freshman.
How do you do, fellow kids?
And he's splashing holy water across Carolyn, who's like buried under the sheet and handcuffed to the chair. Everything in the basement starts to shake and like, you know, fly across the room. Like there's a bunch of tools that fall. There's like some glass vases that explode. And Carolyn's just like screaming and just like moaning and moving in her chair. So like sort of this ghost now has sort of this omniscient power that she can affect not just the person that she's in, but the environment around her. Birds then start to fly around the house, like pigeons and crows and like all these different types of birds start to like swirl around the house and start crashing in through the windows upstairs. We keep cutting back between what's going on in the basement and Drew trying to find April. I was going to say Alice. Alice doesn't live here anymore. He eventually hears her under the floorboards in the kitchen. So he's like moving everything out of the way, trying to find a way into the floorboards. We then cut back to the basement, and Carolyn is vomiting blood through the sheet. And Ed is like, Bathsheba, reveal yourself. And the sheet splits down the middle, and then you see like this horribly demonic face like peek out, and it's like screaming, and there's like blood flying.
Is that Carolyn?
No, it's Bathsheba. It's what she really looks like.
Okay.
So now like her face has taken on Bathsheba's qualities, and it kind of keeps cutting back and forth between them. Ed keeps reciting the Latin, and for some reason Bathsheba sort of calms down and like kind of recedes back into the sheet, and everything in the room is quiet, and there's like no sound. The chair starts to rise up off the ground slowly, and the way they do it is awesome. There's like no sound, no music. Everybody's like in awe of this moment. There's nothing sort of taking you away from it. The chair turns upside down, like magnetizes to the ceiling of the basement, and it starts to like ram through it. Ed demands Bathsheba put Carolyn down. And that's
She's
gonna
like,
work.
Who are you?
Like, it's like a
A
disobedient
guy
child.
that can't like pronounce Latin words. Come
Right.
on. She's like, who
Sancti.
are you? You little dork.
Yeah.
No way, you geek.
So little crybaby Ed is like, put her down. Stop it.
Stop. Put her down.
So the chair falls, and it sort of like with her back to the ground, and it breaks, and she's free of the chair. Roger and Brad jump on top of her, and Ed's like, you gotta subdue her. Like, we can't let her get away, even though she's free and has superhuman strength. He's like, you guys do all the work. Lorraine notices that one of the wardrobes behind Ed is like starting to tip, and she's like, look out. And he dives out of the way, and the thing comes crashing down, and it explodes into a million pieces. Roger and Brad have like Carolyn close to them, and Roger's like, get out of there. You can't have my wife. And he's like trying to like taunt the demon. And at this point, Carolyn is sort of a mixture between herself and Bathsheba. So she has like heavy makeup on. But you could still tell that it's Lily Taylor. But she has like, weird sores, and like her forehead's protruding, and she has like wiry hair, and she's wearing contacts, and her lips are like really chapped. And then she slowly starts to turn toward Roger, and she's like, she's already gone. You're all gonna die now. Shotgun that Brad left by the piano starts to tip and starts to turn towards them, and it goes off. But Brad jumps in front of Ed and knocks him down so that the shotgun blast just like, hits something like in the back of the basement. Now comes a stupid decision by one of the characters.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
Drew, who has found April, screams at the top of his lungs,
Who put this thing together? Me!
I found April. She's under the kitchen. And Bathsheba's like, that's my cue. And she knocks everybody off. And she crawls through the crawl space that Lorraine had fallen through earlier in the movie. Mm-hmm. And she crawls up there, and we're like...
Bathsheba in Carolyn's body. You mean?
Yes, yeah. And she kind of does like this kind of like... as she's like... as she's moving, like kind of this like Jim Henson... Muppet creature kind of noise as she's moving. She's like, and she's like, like hunting for.
Oh boy!
She sounds like the penguin in Batman Returns.
Yeah, totally. When you said Jim Henson for a second, I thought you meant Jim Carrey, like in The Mask.
Oh.
And then I was like, oh no, different Jim.
Yep.
Other Jim.
Other Jim. Oh, Jim. But I'm sorry. Before she rushes into the crawl space, she grabs the pair of scissors, the shears that she was going to use to kill Christine earlier.
Sure.
So she picks that up, and then she goes, meow, meow, and she runs into the crawl space, and everybody sort of like runs after her. She finds April in the crawl space, and there's no mention of this in the movie before this part, but like there's like an intricate like bunch of different spaces inside the house that like an adult human can fit in, because she chases April through like all these different like like deposits of space inside the walls of the home.
Right. I think that's so strange.
Yeah, it's weird that it's literally...
that there's a house within the house, basically.
Yeah, and they never go into any detail about that. Like
it sort of does go with that like Adobe Photoshop layers thing. Like there's a secret house within the house.
And I would have been okay if they were like, the ghost is projecting sort of this, this thing. Because like, at this point, you're supposed to believe this is a true story. So like your disbelief is already suspended.
Imagine how weird that would be if every house that you lived in had like a lot of room set aside in the walls to like walk through. That's crazy.
Right. It wouldn't make sense.
Diminishes
like
the living space of your house by so much.
Right. It only proves why the house is so drafty, because there's no insulation. It's just all these empty spaces.
Right.
Eventually, Carolyn gets April into this crawl space where Ed is like trying to get to her, but he doesn't know how they got around. So he's got like this little hole, and his hand is like reaching towards them, but it's like too far away. He's just stuck. He's not small enough to fit through the hole. Roger comes to like a different hole in the crawl space, and he can see her too. And they're just sort of all like yelling at her, like, don't do it. And she's like raising the scissors up to stab April. And by this point, she's kind of fully turned into this Bathsheba monster kind of, appearance. Drew breaks through the floorboards in the kitchen, and it turns out it's right on top of where Carolyn is. So Lorraine goes into the kitchen and she grabs Carolyn by the head and she like activates her clairvoyant powers.
Go, gadget, necktie!
By like touching her head. Bathsheba, I command you to leave this house. Remember your children. Remember like the beach. Go back to that memory. So she's sort of like calling upon Carolyn to fight Bathsheba internally by like showing this, this memory to her to remember, to sort of fight back. So she remembers this beach scene and how happy they were before they got into this house. And that gives her the courage to expel the demon, and she bends over and she vomits like up the blood that Bathsheba had transferred to her. And then she's still kind of like covered in sores or whatever, but she's like back to normal. They're leading her outside and the sun has risen and it's like the next day. And as soon as she steps outside, like all the bruises, as soon as she touches the light, all the bruises start to disappear from her body. And then we get a really awkward kiss between Ed and Lorraine, where he does the teeth to the lips kiss.
Ew.
And like the two, it's like a bunch
Also,
of
like,
marbles
how do you
clinking.
kiss somebody that just a few minutes ago was possessed by a demon?
No, this is Ed kissing Lorraine.
Oh.
Yeah. So they share this weird, awkward kiss, and then April brings the locket that Lorraine had lost in the basement. She found it, and she gives it back to her, and she opens it up, and it has like Judy's face in it. Ed and Lorraine go home, and they put the music box, Rory's music box, into the relic room.
Uh-huh.
Because that's like another artifact from their case. As Ed is putting the music box in like a special space, Lorraine comes in, and she's like, hey, the Vatican approved the exorcism. And my
That's
first
great.
thought was, no, they didn't, because this all happened the same day. So how did they do it so quickly? That doesn't make any sense.
Oh.
She then says, in a very like poorly researched line, says, there's a case in Long Island we need to discuss. But this movie is supposed to take place in 1971, and the Amityville Horror, the murders didn't happen until 1974, and the haunting didn't happen until 1975. So they tried to shoehorn this in because in The Conjuring 2, it starts off with them investigating the Amityville Horror, and then they go to another case, which is the main plot of The Conjuring 2. They didn't need that little like stinger at the end, like to draw any interest, it just makes it like just poorly researched.
It's like at the end of that movie with the psychopath with the different personalities, and then Bruce Willis is.
Oh my God! Yes, yeah. Split. Where the woman's like, "Hey, that seems like those murders that happened like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Remember that?" And you're like, "No, nobody remembers that.
Literally nobody in this audience remembers that movie.
What was that guy's name?" And then Bruce Willis is like, "Mr. Glass." Ed is like, oh, okay, I guess we got to go investigate this case that's 40 years away from happening. So the camera pans from like the doorway as Ed and Lorraine walk off, and they shut the door, and it pans over to the music box, and it opens, and then it starts to play music. And you're like waiting and waiting because you're like, there's going to be one more scare. There's going to be one more scare. And then the music ends, and then they go like, boom, and then it cuts to black. And then the movie's over.
So no more scare.
No, there's no more scare. That one, they tried to do a little bit of a scare by playing like a little bit of a bass note kind of coming at you, like boom, and then it cuts to black, but it's not scary. There's no face or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do a really cool thing at the end where they show real photographs of the family and of the Warrens and newspaper clippings from the time. And instead of showing like a picture of Patrick Wilson, they have a real picture of Ed Warren, and then they put Patrick Wilson's name so you can see who everybody played.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
But it really was a real family, the Warrens?
Yep.
I mean, the
Perron.
Perrons?
Yep, they were a real family. They had 5 daughters. The house was very different, though. The house was more of a kind of a flat farmhouse. It wasn't like this kind of big Gothic Southern house.
Yeah.
Just because the photos of the real house, when you look at them, you're like, there's nothing scary about that. They obviously dressed it to
Yeah.
have some sort of
But
dread.
the real family in real life said that this happened?
Yes. I also listened to this 2-hour-long audio confession, I guess you could say, about the woman who lives in the Perron house now. And
Why would you do that?
because she claims, she lays out all this evidence that none of this stuff ever happened, and that I believe it's Nancy Perron was the one who wrote a book about the what happened in the house.
Mm-hmm.
According to this woman who lives in the house now, that Roger actually kicked the Warrens out of their house after a certain amount of time because they were living there to sort of investigate, and he had just had like enough of their malarkey, and he kicked them out. And the family lived there until 1980, lived in this like creepy house until 1980. When they moved, the creepy stuff mysteriously stopped, and nobody who's lived in that house since has had any problems with any ghosts or anything like that. But this woman did, verify that, Bathsheba was a real person, that she did live in the house, that she did kill her baby, that she did hang herself, that she was a reported Satanist. Like, all that stuff is true. There had been mysterious deaths, like suicides in the house over the 8 generations of people that had owned it. There had been a lot of weird stuff that happened in the house, but nothing, the Perones sort of describe as happening. And, Lorraine still to this day says that Carolyn rose up in her chair, as she was being possessed, as they were doing, there was no exorcism, but there was a seance where Lorraine apparently talked to Bathsheba, and during that, Carolyn rose out of her chair, like the chair rose with her, like into the air.
Well, it's weird to me that these, like, I guess otherwise sane, like, normal adults are like, oh yeah, we held a seance. Like, she totally rose out of her chair.
Right.
That's so weird.
I do feel like if something like that happened to me, where I witnessed it, I wouldn't expect other people to believe me too. It's easy for us to dismiss it, but like part of me wants it to be true.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's so interesting. I just think like, what if this stuff did really happen? Like, would anybody believe me? And the answer would probably be no.
No, they'd lock you up in a nut house.
Yeah.
I would be the first one in line.
Yep.
With that key.
But it's sort of like that frustrating, kind of.
Just kidding. I wouldn't. I'd believe you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you'd probably be scared. You'd be like, don't tell me that. Don't ever tell me that
I'd
again.
be like, the rules about telling me scary things.
Yeah. That
Creepy.
Electrical wiring, if it's not grounded properly, or if there's like some sort of short in it, it can actually emit a frequency that people describe as feeling dread.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So it's like this heavy sonic frequency that sort of when it hits your ears, it gives you that sort of feeling that you're being watched, but it's just like the heaviness of like air particles and like radio waves just affecting you. And that's like a common like thing that they check like on like when they do like ghost hunting or whatever. They check for like electromagnetic field hotspots. And because like some people are like, I walk into the laundry room and I feel like there's somebody watching me, and it turns out that like a panel that's connected to the washing machine, the wires are either crossed or they're not grounded or there's not proper insulation, and those electronic yeah,
I bet that causes a lot of like depression for people too.
Yeah, I bet it does too, because it's like this feeling that you're like, it's like one of these things like you shift your shoulder and you're like you can't get it comfortable because like you feel like something is like just put their hand on your shoulder.
Well, that's creeperoni.
So I'm assuming that you're gonna watch The Conjuring with me.
I guess, even though this one really does sound scary to me.
I think you will find it scary. There's just a lot of jump scares, and
yeah,
I think that besides the Warrens, I think that Lily Taylor and Ron Livingston do a good job as the parents. The Warrens are just interesting on just like a kooky level, rather than like an emotional level. Like you feel no connection between them and their daughter.
Who plays Lorraine Warren?
Vera Farmiga.
Oh, right.
Fake Dr. Melfi.
Right.
What in particular scares you about what we've talked about?
The possession. Something taking over your body. That's scary to me. And I know we keep going back to all of these feminist themes, but just like the power of a woman's rage that could like transcend through time.
Right.
Something must have been making her feel like the most deep, crazy rage to like murder her own child, and the power of that rage transcended time.
Right.
That is terrifying to me. The idea of something or someone taking over your body is really scary. Ghosts are still kind of governed by like certain rules,
right?
And which is why they need to possess people. But you have to ask yourself, like, why would somebody become like that? And my answer that I come up with is like, the society that she lived in didn't offer her a lot of like autonomy. She had to gain control in whatever way. Like,
I was gonna say, like, what is like the Church of Satan, but just another, like a rebellion against current organized religion or old ways, or
and the rebellion is like structured in such a way that it actually mirrors the exact religion that it's trying to rebel against.
Exactly. Yeah, like the Church of Satan does similar practices to like Catholic Mass. It's not like they have like this radical new thing. It's like
if you were
it's all
really
a mockery.
rebelling, like you could just not do Christianity, but instead they decided to design like a mirror inverse Christianity.
Right, exactly. Like the real rebellion would be to practice nothing at all.
Right.
But
of course.
But it's also like, religion is like a place where people find home. And so they don't find home in this one thing, so they rebel to find home in another one. It's like those movies where the kid runs away from home and they find home in like a gang of like other kids.
Yeah.
Like that sort of thing. It's like they're moving from one family to another. They just don't realize it. That what they're seeking is just companionship and understanding, and they're getting it from two different places. It doesn't matter that one has like, a homeless bunch of gang kids on the street and the other one's like just like a suburban house.
Uh-huh.
They're still finding the same thing. They just don't realize it. The rebellion would be to completely, shed everything and live by yourself on like an island.
To just renounce all the things, all the cultural institutions.
Right. And to live like an animal.
Yeah. That would be like a pretty strong rebellion.
Yep. Little Animal Farm.
Yeah. A little 1984.
Yeah. The recipe that I came up with for this one, it was really hard to find anything that sort of matched the movie. So what got me thinking was like big family sort of 70s snacks. And I thought like what would be a really good recipe is like Rice Krispie Treats, but they're like in the shape of ghosts.
Oh yeah.
And you can put like some frosting on it that makes it look like black and white ghost or something like
Cute.
that. But or like one that looks like a little house, like a haunted house or something like that. Because when I think of the 70s and I think of snacks, I think Chex Mix, Jell-O, and Rice Krispie Treats.
I thought you were gonna say Hot Pockets.
Oh.
Pizza bagels.
Were they around in the 70s? I think that's a 90s thing, right?
I mean, Hot Pockets as we know them, I think, is a 90s thing. But, like, definitely there was microwave food in the 70s.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to watch it to see if there are, like, any kind of emotional puzzle pieces that we didn't talk about that, like, maybe will just jump out at me.
Mm-hmm. I feel like with the way these horror movies are made today that, like, we talked about this before, sort of subtleties and subtext are and motifs and things like that are so rarely inserted into like any movie nowadays.
I think you and I would make an amazing horror movie because we would be like really concerned about that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's like you want the audience to be uneasy, but you also want them to come away with like sort of an analysis that goes beyond just something popping out and scaring you.
Right.
Like what does this all mean in a greater context of day-to-day life, history, other movies, things like that. I don't know if there's a lot of hidden subtext in this movie because it's pretty straightforward, but I think we've been able to draw some cool things from the other movies that we've seen, despite the fact that they don't lean too heavily on any sort of
Plus I'm just like always looking for those kind of things.
Yeah. This is everybody's favorite part of the show, where I plug my books. I'm actually very proud to announce the release of my new novel, not the scary one, but a new one called Termination Dust. It's inspired by Jack London novels and the Old West portrayals of Alaska and Canada in the 18 and 1900s. It's available in Kindle and hardcover. It's actually my first hardcover book. You can get either version through my website, notyourplatypus.com. That's notyourplatypus.com. I'll also have links in our social media and in the description of this episode for you to buy the book. As always, you can also pick up a copy of my horror novel below by also going to notyourplatypus.com. How do we want to sign off? We got to come up with like a sign off.
Oh my God. I feel really unprepared.
Maybe we should just end it. Like, now.
Now.